Chapter 622. In fact, if you want to integrate into the town, the most important thing is to have no gap with them. Don't let them always think that you are the one who controls the town's economy. You are different from them. When they no longer care about your skin color and your property, you are officially integrated with the town's residents. Ignoring Jiang Hai's puzzled gaze, Kelly Soren smiled and spoke. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. He knew that the girl was right, but now that Jiang Hai wants to integrate here, he needs to consider a lot of things. After all, he has a net worth of billions. Although most of it is not known, he still needs to think about it. But I don't know how to play football or baseball. My understanding of these two sports is limited to the cartoons I've seen before. Shrugging, Jiang Hai said helplessly. Indeed, he didn't know much about these two sports. In fact, football and baseball are very easy. There are football and baseball teams in our town. I am very familiar with their people. If you are interested in joining, I can recommend you to try. Looking at Jiang Hai, Kelly said with a smile. But listening to her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It's better not to integrate sports into the story of the city. Even if it's football and baseball, Jiang Hai doesn't want anyone to say that he doesn't do his job. Well, it's a bit of a sloppy job. Hey, Kelly, I was looking for you. You were here. Just as Jiang Hai and Kelly were chatting happily, a young man in his early 20s also came over. After looking at Jiang Hai with some vigilance, he said to Kelly Soren, "Hey Jack, what can I do for you?" But obviously, Kelly Sauron was not like a little girl who would take the initiative to leave. It was not easy for her to make friends with Jiang Hai. She would not leave so easily. Hearing Kelly Soren's words, the young man named Jack was speechless. It could be seen that this young man named Jack was interested in Kelly, but Kelly wasn't interested in him now. Well, I was going to ask you if you wanted a drink, but it seems like there's no need for that now. Jack shrugged his shoulders and said helplessly. He took one last look at Jiang Hai and walked back to the campfire. The man named Baveda Jindirat spoke, and his eyes drifted to Jiang Hai's side from time to time. Baveda is actually a good guy. He's witty, humorous, and earns a lot of money. His family background is also not bad. No wonder Delia was able to establish a relationship with him so quickly and even brought him home. Looking at Jack and Baveda in the distance, Kelly said this sentence unconsciously, but Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh when he heard it. In fact, he understood the meaning of the girl's words. If he didn't appear today, Kelly would probably be Jack's female companion. But to be honest, Jiang Hai was not interested in these girls. It didn't matter if it was just for fun, but if he got involved, it was not necessary because they were unlikely to tolerate Jiang Hai's nonsense. Jiang Hai's business was not small now. Naturally, he also needed a woman who could take care of the overall situation. Well, the party is about to start. Let's go. By the way, do you have an auction item? Looking at Kelly Soren in front of him, Jiang Hai looked at her curiously and asked. Kelly also chuckled when she heard Jiang Hai's words. I auctioned some flower seeds. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't care about what she said, Jiang Hai didn't know what Kelly was thinking, but her face didn't change. She just continued to speak with a smile. Don't donate the money later. Okay, let's go. Glancing at Kelly, Jiang Hai walked over with a smile. As they walked over, the party officially began. The parent-level existences in the room also came out and had a good meal around the campfire. Then, it was time for the auction. Today's auctioneer was Delia, and the first item to be auctioned was her item. This item was a very delicate silver snuff bottle. In fact, it was given to her by a tourist from Huaxia. After all, Delia was quite good-looking. In the face of such a foreign woman, not everyone was as calm as still water, so some tourists would come to flirt with her. Of course, they didn't do anything excessive, but it didn't matter if they received some gifts in exchange for some gifts. After all, it was a pure silver snuff bottle, so the bidding price wasn't low at the beginning. $20 or $30 were constantly being bid. 50. Jiang Hai looked at it. He also had some interest in this little thing. After all, it was also something from his country, and Jiang Hai could also benefit from it. But just as he finished bidding $50, Delia's boyfriend, Baveda Jinduro, bid $100. As soon as he saw him bid, Jiang Hai directly gave it to him. But when he learned that Jiang Hai had gotten the snuff bottle, this guy clearly looked at him with disdain, which made Jiang Hai a little unhappy. Does this guy think I'm easy to bully? Baveda is a good guy, but he's still too young. He just graduated from college not long ago. His family got someone to help him get into the securities center to be a trader. It's okay to have a friend, but he's still a long way off. Perhaps sensing Jiang Hai's dissatisfaction, old George, who was sitting next to him, couldn't help but laugh. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also laughed. He understood what old George meant. He wanted Jiang Hai not to be angry with this guy. He wouldn't be angry with Jiang Hai, but it was inevitable that he would be unhappy. But he wouldn't directly fight back. Jiang Hai wasn't interested in the next few items. There was a blanket, a handmade saddle, an oil painting, and so on. Jiang Hai wasn't very interested in these things, so he just sat there and looked. We all know that Kelly's family is the largest flower plantation in the town. All the flowers in the town are planted by her family. These 100 seeds contain all kinds of flowers, and I can guarantee that every single one of them can be planted. To be honest, even I want some of them. Alright, the auction with no reserve price starts now. Just as Jiang Hai was sitting there and looking, the flower seeds that Kelly had mentioned to him were finally brought up. Although it was only a small packet, it could be seen that after Delia mentioned it, many women showed a look of yearning. There were very few women who didn't like flowers and sparkling things. However, compared to sparkling things, flowers were easier to come into contact with. Many women looked at their male companions on the spot. Their intentions were self-evident. $50. However, before anyone spoke, the first one to speak was Jack. It could be seen that he was deeply in love with Kelly, so it was natural for him to be the first one to call her. After calling her name, he looked at Kelly excitedly. As for the others, after hearing that the starting price was $50, most of them fell silent. 100 seeds were sold for $50, which meant that each seed was sold for 50 cents. That was a bit unacceptable for everyone. After all, it was already a bit of a loss to sell a flower for 50 cents, let alone a seed that might not even survive. $100. But unfortunately, in order to repay Kelly for her words, Jiang Hai didn't care about money, even though it was unlikely that anything would happen between Jiang Hai and her. He directly took out $100. $200. Jack, who originally thought that he had it in the bag, couldn't help but be stunned when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Then, he glared at Jiang Hai and called out a number. $500. But unfortunately, Jiang Hai didn't care at all. With his net worth, a few $100s? If it fell into the sea while he was out at sea, he might not even go into the sea to get it. He indeed didn't care about this little bit of money, but that didn't mean that others didn't care. Many people sucked in a cold breath when they heard Jiang Hai raise the price to $500. One had to know that the purchase rate of dollars in the United States was still very high. $500 could last a month. Although it was a bit tight, it was at least enough for food, drinks, rent, utilities, internet, and so on. When Jiang Hai called out $500, Jack's expression turned ugly. Many people looked at Kelly with the same expression in their eyes. You're in luck. In their eyes, Jiang Hai spent a lot of money to buy Kelly's things because Jiang Hai wanted to pursue her. But only Kelly knew that Jiang Hai was only paying for it. Seeing Kelly's look, Jack pulled Baveda over and whispered to him. After that, Jack called out a number. $650. I really like these seeds. Please give me some face and let me have them. $650 was already the sum of all the cash he and Baveda had on them. But they knew that Jiang Hai was rich. If Jiang Hai didn't let them have the money now, they wouldn't have any more money to buy. Unfortunately, when he said that, the Winthrop townsfolk were amused. Now, everyone in Winthrop knew that Jiang Hai was famous for being amenable to persuasion but not coercion. If you asked him in private, he might stop, but if you threatened him so openly, it would be strange if he didn't. Sure enough, as soon as Jack finished speaking, Jiang Hai raised his hand again. He glanced at the group and couldn't help but chuckle. $1,000. As soon as Jiang Hai finished speaking, everyone present exclaimed, $1,000. A small auction like this might not even sell for $1,000 in the end. But Jiang Hai casually called out this price just to buy 100 flower seeds. It had to be said that ordinary people really didn't understand the world of the rich. As for Jack, when he heard Jiang Hai's words, he was already angry. He wanted to rush over but was stopped by Baveda. Chapter 6:23. Calm down, Jack, we're in Winthrop. Looking at Jiang Hai and the others in the distance, Baveda Jindirat whispered in Jack's ear. Hearing Baveda's words, Jack had to calm down. Jiang Hai was throwing money at the girl he liked in front of him. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to bear it, okay? $1,500. Looking at Jack's eyes that were about to burst into flames, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. He actually raised the price by $500 when he offered $1,000. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, everyone looked at Jack with a hint of ridicule on their faces. Although they weren't familiar with Jiang Hai, they knew that Jiang Hai really didn't lack money. You bastard! Jack couldn't help but roar when he heard Jiang Hai raise the price by $500 like a slap in the face. $2,000. Hearing Jack's roar, Jiang Hai stood up again and said smugly. He didn't know if it was the feeling of being a bad guy hidden in his genes that made him burn up again. He now really liked the feeling of slapping others in the face in front of them. He was a bad guy, come and hate him. Who the F***CK, idiot? Seeing Jiang Hai raise the price to $2,000, the man's face became even uglier. After cursing a few times, he turned and left. He knew that he wouldn't have a good ending if he had a conflict with Jiang Hai here. Instead of humiliating himself here, it was better to just leave. Therefore, he didn't care about Baveda's pull and directly left George's horse farm. He rode his motorcycle outside and left. Watching him leave, Jiang Hai helplessly shrugged. Okay, the final price is $2,000. These seeds belong to our Winthrop's richest man, Mr. Jiang Hai. Seeing that her only competitor had left, although she knew that he couldn't afford the price, Delia still waited for him to leave before announcing the birth of today's bidding king. After Delia gave the flower seed to Jiang Hai nodded and said, "Let's go." Jiang Hai also directly took out $2,000 in cash and handed it to Kelly Sauron next to him. When Kelly took the money, she deliberately scratched Jiang Hai's palm. Her meaning was obvious, but Jiang Hai didn't want anything to happen with her. So, he just smiled, gave her the money and returned to his seat. Looking at Jiang Hai's performance, Kelly curled her lips a little helplessly. If it was an ordinary American, he would have left with her or taken her away. Jiang Hai didn't bring a female companion, but he was still so careful. Back in his seat, Jiang Hai leaned back and looked at the items that continued to be auctioned. Hey, Jiang Hai, your move is really good. Not only did you defeat your rival, but it seems that you also made Kelly completely fall in love with you. Serge walked over and sat next to Jiang Hai and whispered to him. Even though Cersei was a father, he was still quite young. He was only at the level of a university student. It's just that he didn't go to college. Instead, he used the money and time from college to open a parts factory. Are you familiar with this Kelly? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai asked him strangely. Of course, Kelly is a famous flower in our town. Her family also grows flowers. The largest flower shop in our town is opened by her family. Her family is also your tenant. After all, it's on the business street. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Serge also said to Jiang Hai, black people's personalities are two extremes. If he doesn't know you well, he doesn't like to talk to you, especially when he doesn't like you. But if he knows you well, then he is a chatterbox, and the speed of talking is not much slower than the speed of rapping. As soon as he heard Jiang Hai ask about Kelly, he started to talk nonstop. Jiang Hai also had a general understanding. Kelly was quite famous in the town. She was quite beautiful, and her studies were good since she was a child. She was not a troublemaker. In high school, she didn't mess around with men and women. In college, she had a boyfriend, but the guy was 1 year older than her. They broke up after graduation. Now, she was still in a relationship. And this Jack is Baveda's friend. Kelly is Delia's friend. They met through this pair. After that, Jack started to pursue Kelly. However, judging from the current situation, the effect wasn't very good. By the way, I heard that you often play football games? Listening to Serge's machine gun-like words, Jiang Hai immediately shouted stop and began to change the topic. Of course, I am a member of our Winthrop football team. Although we Winthrop people don't have much money, our team is definitely in the top 3 in this area. Serge said with a smile when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Americans really like to play baseball and football. There are 4 major leagues in North America: ice hockey, baseball, basketball, and football. However, ice hockey was more or less a limited sport. There was no ice in the South. If they wanted ice, they had to build their own ice rink in the stadium. If they played in this way, they would definitely have to spend money. After all, not everyone was willing to spend this money. Therefore, the expansion of ice hockey among the people is not very good. Basketball was originally a pure black sport. Although white people participate in it, they are still much less well known. And in the United States, after all, white people still have the final say. Basketball's position in the United States is more awkward. In the beginning, it was only better than ice hockey. Later, it might not even be able to maintain its position in the United States. Fortunately, David Stern decided to globalize and make the NBA of the world. Speaking of football, there were 5 major leagues in Europe, which divided the viewing audience. Some like to watch the English Premier League, some like to watch Serie A, some like to watch La Liga, and so on. But when it came to basketball, there was only one international league in the world, the NBA. All the top players had to join this league, which was the highest level of competition. Because of this, although basketball is very famous in the United States now, there are not many people who really like it. Baseball is a sport for white people in the United States. There is no physical collision. Before the rise of football, baseball has always been the biggest league in the United States. When it began to decline, perhaps it was after the United States began to strictly investigate racial discrimination. Speaking of football, it is worthy of being the biggest sport in North America. This sport is very barbaric and makes people excited. Most importantly, black people and white people can have their own exclusive positions on the field. For example, black people, defensive linemen, running backs, and receivers were all positions that they could play. On the other hand, white people had a much higher chance of producing a top-notch quarterback. In addition, this sport was really a clash of muscles, so there were many people watching it. The community sports culture in the United States is very developed. Almost every community, every small town has its own many kinds of teams, such as basketball, baseball, football, and so on. Then, the nearby cities or states will hold some competitions from time to time every year. There are also prizes. Not only can the teams show their faces, but they can also get some monetary rewards. So in the United States, sports for all people is not just a saying. When it comes to football, Serge is obviously more interested than Kelly. This is because he knows that Kelly will not like him, but he likes football very much. But to be honest, Jiang Hai does not know much about football. The only thing he has seen about football is a cartoon, Lightspeed Masked Man 21. This is a normal cartoon from Japan. It is very exciting to watch, but because of the audience, this cartoon that Jiang Hai thought was good did not become popular in China. The main character, Kobayakawa Ryona, can reach a speed of 4.2 seconds for 40 meters, 0.91 meters per yard. Later it evolved to 4.1 seconds, which is faster than the speed of light on the field. But for Jiang Hai is 4.1 seconds for 40 meters fast? If he runs with all his strength, he should be able to run 100 meters in less than 5 seconds. After all, the human body limit of 4 times is not a joke. However, Jiang Hai is just listening. The last time he played basketball, he almost collapsed. This time, it is better for him to be careful. After listening to Serge for a long time, Jiang Hai also listened for a long time, but he did not intend to try it. But he does not want to try it, but Serge wants him to see it. He can see that Jiang Hai does not know much about football, but in his opinion as a man, how can he not like football? This should not be the case. It just so happens that we have a friendly game the day after tomorrow against Chelsea, a city near Boston, not a football team, in Boston's XX Stadium. You can come and see it then. Seeing that Jiang Hai seems to be moved by his words, Serge could not help but say excitedly. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also nodded. It does not matter if I go and see it. He has nothing to do anyway. After the time was agreed, the auction here was also over. In the end, a total of $4,270 were sold tonight. Of course, 2,000 of them were Jiang Hai's. The owner of this money can choose to donate the money or choose to take it away. Basically, anything worth $100 or $80 was donated, and anything worth a few $100s was taken away, especially Kelly's money. If she donated it, naturally, everyone would be very happy, but if she took it away, no one would say anything. After all, it was $2,000. In the end, she hugged Jiang Hai and wanted Jiang Hai to send her back. After failing, Kelly Solon pouted and left. Jiang Hai also drove back to his manor. Today was a good start. After returning, Jiang Hai told Bernice and the others that he was going to watch the football game the day after tomorrow, but they despised him because in their view, the football game was actually a very barbaric game. At least, they did not like it. Chapter 624. Run this way and go around to catch the ball. When the catcher catches the ball, pay attention to the flanks and protect both sides. Looking at the people warming up on the field, Jiang Hai slowly walked to the stands next to him with a hint of expectation on his face. Jiang Hai really had nothing to do recently, so after tying the grass this morning, he went home to change his clothes, took a shower, and drove to Boston Stadium because he remembered Cersei said that they had a game against Chelsea today. Sure enough, as soon as he entered, he saw the people warming up. At this time, the catchers were warming up. Rugby balls were bounced out, and a black Winthrop catcher was constantly jumping in the air and collecting the football in the air into his arms. He had to admit that Winthrop's rugby team had a lot of people, and many of them were people that Jiang Hai knew. Of course, he was only familiar with them. In addition to Cersei, he also recognized the person who sold him the sea map at the Poseidon Festival. He was the defensive lineman, and Cersei was the offensive lineman. In addition, there were some people that he was familiar with, but he did not know what they were for. Winthrop was not small, but there were not many people. It was a town with a total of only a little more than 1,000 people. Although Jiang Hai wasn't the same as when he first came here, when he saw a white person as a white person and a black person as a black person, and if he didn't look carefully, he couldn't tell who was who. But now, he still looked a little blurry. After glancing at Cersei and the others, Jiang Hai looked to the side and saw a group of girls dancing on the sidelines. What surprised Jiang Hai was that among these girls, Jiang Hai actually knew two of them. One was Delia, and the other was Kelly Solon. At this time, these two girls were leading a dozen girls of different ages to dance there. The weather was indeed not warm, and it was even a little cold. Wisps of white steam were coming out of the heads of these girls. It was obvious that they had been practicing for a long time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, Winthrop will win, Winthrop will win, Winthrop is the best. Listening to the girls' slogans, Jiang Hai slowly walked over. He had to admit that the Winthrop girls were quite good-looking, probably because they lived by the sea. The Winthrop girls had good figures, tight and elastic. Especially today, they were still wearing summer cheerleading uniforms. The top was a shirt that exposed the waist, and the bottom was a skirt. Although they were wearing safety pants and knee-length white stockings, it still looked very cold. It was only about a few degrees outside. Jiang Hai? Ladies, that's enough. Let's conserve our energy. We still have to cheer for our warriors later. Seeing Jiang Hai walk over, Kelly and Delia clapped their hands, signaling the girls who were still dancing to take a break. Hearing their words, the girls who were still dancing stopped. Then, without caring about the sweat on their bodies, they directly put on the jackets next to them, because they knew that they were not wearing much at this time. If they waited for a while before putting on their jackets, they would catch a cold. They did not want to be cheerleaders for a small town's team and end up affecting their normal lives. That would not be worth it, especially in the United States, where a cold was not a minor illness. That was because the United States did not sell the cold medicine from China. Cold medicine actually had side effects. While killing germs, it would also kill white blood cells. In the past, the cold medicine from China contained an ingredient called cough. Alright, I can't say it, but this ingredient, after being refined, could be made into a unique product. Therefore, generally speaking, the cold medicine from China was not allowed to enter the market. And foreign countries did not produce their own cold medicine, so if you caught a cold, the hospital would only give you a bunch of vitamins and let you go home to take them. Then, force yourself to endure and use your own immune system to cure the cold. If it was really too serious, and you had a high fever that made you unconscious, then you would be directly taken to the hospital to be hospitalized for drip. Therefore, in the United States, a cold was really not a comfortable illness, so most people paid attention to this point. Jiang, why are you here? After putting on their jackets again, Delia and Kelly ran over with a smile. I heard from Cersei that there is a game today. I have nothing to do, so I came to take a look. Looking at the two girls in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. He naturally knew that these two girls did not have good intentions towards him. They were quite interested in him. No, it should be said that they were interested in his money. But they were all from the same town, so Jiang Hai did not want to have a falling out with the residents of the town. If that happened, it would be very awkward. He wanted to have some relations with Aphrodite and the others, even though Jiang Hai had been arguing that rabbits did not eat the grass near their burrows. But if Jiang Hai was a little tougher, then it would at most be a little awkward when Aphrodite and his women met in the future. That was all. But if old George or Kelly Solon's father blocked the door with a gun, then it would be awkward. So even if he knew that as long as he waved his hand, the two girls would follow him, he still did not dare to do so. Yeah, we'll definitely teach those Chelsea people a lesson today. Come on, come and sit here. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, which were obviously distant, Delia could not help but curl her lips, but Kelly still said with a smile. Then the two girls took Jiang Hai to the front of the stands at the back. At this time, there were already a lot of people sitting in the stands. Some of these people were the players' families, some were the townspeople who had nothing to do, and some were passers-by. In the United States, football was indeed a national sport. Many people liked it. When they saw a game, it was inevitable for them to come in and take a look. Among these people, Jiang Hai found a group of familiar kids. They were the children who had asked him for candy on Halloween. But unfortunately, these children were going crazy there at this time, and no one would pay attention to Jiang Hai. In the world of children, although money was important, it was not the most important thing. They knew that Jiang Hai was rich, but they did not care about the money, so they did not care about what was going on with Jiang Hai. Jiang, do you know about football? Sitting in the first row of the stands, Delia and Kelly did not care. They sat on the left and right of Jiang Hai. After all, they had just finished exercising. The two girls' bodies were exuding heat. When a woman smelled a man's sweat, she would feel that this person was very manly, and when a man smelled a woman's sweat, he would feel strange. Just as Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed, Delia asked Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai nodded. I know a little about it. The field is divided into the offensive team and the defensive team, but that is professional. It is also divided into linebackers, receivers, quarterbacks, running backs, and so on. If you carry the ball to the area in front of the big fork, you will get 5 points and you can add a penalty kick. If you also touch the field, you will get 2 more points. If you kick the ball into the goal, you will get 1 point. If you choose to kick the ball under normal circumstances, you will get 3 points and there is no chance to add offense. Hearing Delia's question, Jiang Hai touched his nose and said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia could not help but be a little surprised. I thought you didn't know anything. On the other side, Kelly smiled and put her hand on Jiang Hai's arm and said with a smile. Seeing Kelly's action, Delia also took the initiative to move closer to Jiang Hai. Feeling the two girls getting closer and closer, Jiang Hai did not know what to do for a moment. Although Jiang Hai usually meant what he said, when it came to the matters between men and women, Jiang Hai was still very passive. It was clear from the number of times he was disobeyed. Our team is a team that combines running and passing. Cersei's speed and skills are very good. The catchers, Tom and Carrie, are very good. Their running positions are quite sharp. In Boston, The only teams that can compete with us are Boston, Chelsea, and Cambridge. But recently, Cambridge's main force moved to California, and they can't do it anymore. Currently, they are in Massachusetts. It's us, Chelsea, and Boston, the three powerhouses. Delia and Kelly did not care whether Jiang Hai was embarrassed or not. They wanted to sit directly in Jiang Hai's arms at this time. There was nothing wrong with sticking to Jiang Hai. While sticking to Jiang Hai, they also talked to Jiang Hai about the strength of Winthrop and the enemies of Winthrop. At this time, on the other side of the field, a group of people in blue and white came out of the tunnel. If nothing unexpected happened, those people should be the opponent of the Winthrop team today, Chelsea. Chelsea's security guards, go back to your hometown. As soon as they saw Chelsea come out, the stands on the other side of the field were naturally filled with thunderous cheers. But on the Winthrop side, the boos were deafening. Even Delia stood up and shouted at the team over there. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. This Chelsea team is famous for playing dirty on our side. Their boss and their quarterback are called Kristen Adis. He has a big casino in Chelsea. These players are the security guards he hired. It's not an exaggeration to say that they are notorious. Kelly also said to Jiang Hai when she saw the confusion in Jiang Hai's eyes. Well, they really don't look like good-for-nothings. He glanced at the people over there. Although they were far away, Jiang Hai's eyes were good. With a glance at the people over there, he knew that these people were not good-for-nothings. Although there was no murderous aura on them, which meant that they had no lives on their hands, their fierce aura was quite strong. If an average person encountered these guys, they would probably be shocked by their fierce aura. Of course, this was also a characteristic of being a security guard. No, it was not right to call them security guards because they should be thugs to be exact. Chapter 625. We'll be counting on you later. Winthrop's captain patted Cersei's shoulder as he looked at the Chelsea team. Cersei was in the spare parts business all year round, so he could not afford to hire anyone. Therefore, he did all the loading and unloading of the car himself. Coupled with his black physique, he ran extremely fast and his body was abnormally strong. He could be said to be one of the best running backs in the Massachusetts Town League. There were not many non-professional players in Massachusetts who were better than him. The only one who could compete with him was the Boston team's running back. Cersei laughed when he heard the captain's words. After the two teams appeared on the stage, the game was about to start. Kelly and Delia, although they still wanted to stay by Jiang Hai's side, now that the game had started, they had no choice but to leave. After all, they were still cheerleaders. There will be a barbecue after the game. Let's go together. Kelly and Delia said to Jiang Hai before they left. For a game like theirs, regardless of whether they won or lost, there would be a party. If they lost, they would relax. If they won, they would naturally celebrate. Today's party was prepared early in the morning. It was a barbecue party in Cersei's factory. Holding a barbecue party with the smell of engine oil was really quite creative. Okay. Jiang Hai did not have anything to do today, so he smiled and said, okay. He would not be able to blend into the town and play with the old people. Rather than that, he would rather mix with the young people. Based on the current situation, the young people of Winthrop were quite kind to him. Delia and Kelly laughed when they heard Jiang Hai agree. Then they looked at each other. In a position where Jiang Hai could not see, there were sparks in their eyes from time to time. Regardless of what the two women thought, the match officially began after the two teams finished their warm-up. After the coin toss, the first team to attack was Chelsea. On the other side, Winthrop's team kicked the ball directly to the midfield with a big kick. The Chelsea team's receiver instantly caught the football and ran over. However, before he could run 20 yards, he was pushed to the ground by the Winthrop team's linebacker who rushed over. Bang! Both of their bodies fell on the lawn. Jiang Hai felt the pain in his body when he heard it. Although these people were wearing helmets and protective gear, after all, this was not a professional competition, so the protective gear was not too tight, and the defense was very ordinary. It was somewhat like the protective gear worn by children when they first learned to roller skate, but with the addition of a battle suit like the one worn by the Scions in Dragon Ball when Vegeta and others first came to Earth. It was used to protect the torso. But even so, Jiang Hai looked at the two people who fell and felt pain for them. However, it was nothing to them. Although they pushed the man down, the receiver firmly controlled the ball in his arms. They were going to attack from here, and the ball was also theirs. At the referee's signal, the two teams began to line up. A group of the strongest Americans lined up at the front. These people were the team's wall. They were the linebackers. Behind the linebackers was the quarterback. On the left and right stood the receivers and running forwards. With the referee's whistle, the Chelsea quarterback also began to shout, "Hart, Hart, Hart, Hart." The Chelsea players did not move at first, but when Hart shouted for the third time, the linebacker in the middle instantly threw the football in front of him over his crotch and into the hands of the quarterback. The game began at that moment. On the other side, Winthrop's players also pounced on the opponent at the first moment. The defensive lineman blocked the defensive lineman, and the two interceptors instantly bypassed the human wall and headed towards the opponent's 4-point line. However, the opponent's quarterback had already passed the ball to their running backs. Their forward used one hand to protect the ball while his other hand instantly pressed down on the helmet of a tackler who was rushing over. The tackler fell to the ground. Then, he jumped over the tackler and sprinted in the direction of the goal. Hiss, oh! Looking at the man who fell there and was about to overturn the soil, Jiang Hai also grinned. But although it felt a little cruel, Jiang Hai's eyes could not leave the field in front of him. He now understood why no country other than the United States and Australia had introduced this sport. It was really too cruel. Jiang Hai had only heard of rugby before, but he had not played it in China. He had not even watched a game. He only heard that there was a type of rugby in China that was learned from Europe. It was called the waist flag rugby. Pulling the flag at the waist was considered to have stopped the opponent. It was not as cruel as it was now. He had to admit that there was actually a tyrannical factor in the human body, especially when watching a game like this. Although Chelsea's running forward killed the interceptor, he did not run too far. After running for 5 or 6 yards, he was stopped by a big white man on Winthrop's side with a grappling move. Jiang Hai had some impression of this white man. He did not know his name, but he knew that he was a fisherman. He had a fishing boat at home. Jiang Hai had seen him when he chose the fishing boat to take tourists to play. This guy was 1.95 meters tall. He was fast and strong. After all, he was a fisherman. His fishing boat did not have an automatic net reel. It had to be turned by hand. Even if there were pulleys, that thing was not an ordinary kind of hard. Therefore, he trained this guy to have a strong physique. In an instant, he approached the running back and directly grabbed him. Just like a shoulder bump in wrestling, he directly knocked the guy back more than a meter. The football also fell to the ground powerlessly. The rugby ball touched the ground and the attack failed. If it did not touch the ground, both sides could continue to attack if it was snatched. But if it touched the ground, the attack failed. But Chelsea did not care because they had 4 opportunities to attack. Knock him down. When the two sides rearranged the formation, Jiang Hai was also infected by the atmosphere at the scene. He had to admit that rugby was indeed a sport that could make people's hormones soar rapidly. In the beginning, when he watched the slam dunk master, he did not care too much. But after Kuriko's basketball came out, it was simply a fantasy instead of a sports competition. After all, it could cover the entire field with a 100% three-point field goal percentage, absolute defense within the three-point line, the ability to imitate the opponent's movements in an instant, the ability to use all postures to put the ball into the basket, the ability to dribble the ball forward and say, "You will make way for me." The opposing player would fall down by himself. If these things appeared in reality, well, there was nothing to see in the NBA. Although the speed of light-masked man was not as bad as Kuriko's basketball, it was also a little exaggerated. But with just a little understanding of the cartoon, Jiang Hai had a smattering of knowledge about the game on the field. He had to admit that it was really interesting. It even gave him the urge to go back and watch the NFL. However, he was only going to take a look. He wasn't too willing to participate in it because the gap between them was too big. Soon, the first half of the game ended amidst the cheers of Jiang Hai and the others. Winthrop's side led the opponent 12-9 with Cecil's 2 touchdowns. The opponent scored a touchdown, hit an extra kick, and scored 3 points with another kick. Hey, Jiang, you're here. Watch how we slaughter these Chelsea guys. When she came back to rest, Serge saw Jiang Hai sitting in the first row at a glance, so she spoke with a smile. I'm waiting for you to win. If you win, I'll pay for the drinks later. Looking at Serge, Jiang Hai also gave a thumbs up and said with a serious face. When she heard that Jiang Hai was paying for the drinks, Serge knew that he was going to celebrate with them. She laughed loudly. When the others learned that Jiang Hai was paying for the drinks and that he was going to celebrate with them, they also shouted that it was a good thing. Originally, when they went to Serge's place, the drinks they drank were just beer or some low-grade wine. After all, they were not rich people. But since Jiang Hai said that he was paying for the drinks, it proved that the drinks later would definitely be much better than they imagined. This time, they were even more excited. What's the commotion over there? Looking at the Winthrop people in the distance, the Chelsea quarterback on the other side, who was also the owner of the team, could not help but ask with some doubts. I heard that the richest man in Winthrop is here and said that he wants to treat them to a drink. Hearing the boss's words, a younger brother next to him could not help but come over and speak to him. Hearing his words, Kristen Adis could not help but raise his eyebrows. The richest man? That Huaxia Jiang. Looking into the distance, he vaguely saw the yellow-skinned guy in the crowd. Jiang Hai's reputation was not only in Winthrop, but also in Boston. After all, this was an out-and-out billionaire. Being on good terms with such a person was beneficial to Kristen. After all, he was the owner of a casino. If he relied on those poor people to play, he wouldn't be able to make much money. At this time, he looked at Jiang Hai as if he was looking at a fat sheep. Of course, was Jiang Hai a fat sheep? The 10-minute break quickly passed. Winthrop and Chelsea came to the field again and the game continued. Chapter 626. Victory. With the last ball, Winthrop's kicker kicked the ball into the opponent's half of the field and ran behind him. After finishing the last minute, Winthrop's side also shouted loudly. Jiang Hai could not help but jump up and wave his fist vigorously. Compared to Winthrop's side, Chelsea's stands on the other side were far less lively. Great play! Jiang Hai shouted loudly to the crowd on the field with his hands by his mouth. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cersei and the others did not forget to wave at Jiang Hai while celebrating. The duration of a football game was actually very short. Of course, it was longer than a football game. Although it looked like it was only 80 minutes, the first half was 40 minutes, and the second half was 40 minutes. But with the addition of the 10 minutes for changing players and timeouts, it was indeed longer than a football game. Of course, this referred to the situation where there was no overtime and injury stoppage time. The game that seemed short but actually lasted for a long time was basketball. For example, in the NBA, it looked like the duration of a game was only 48 minutes, but it was divided into 4 sections. The two teams could call for a lot of stoppages. In addition to the official timeouts, it was not uncommon for a game to last for 2.5 hours. As for today's football game, although it wasn't an NFL game, it still lasted for about 2 hours. In the end, Winthrop won the game 37-30. The hero of the game was naturally Cersei. This guy scored 5 touchdowns and was the biggest contributor to today's victory. At the end of the game, Winthrop's people had already carried him up. And he also sat on everyone's shoulders, waving his arms vigorously. This victory was indeed very good. As for Chelsea's side, they were a little depressed. Indeed, the people on the Chelsea team were more aggressive. After all, they were all hired thugs. Oh no, they were hired as security guards. Their ferocity might be useful against those professional football players, but it was useless against some fishermen who relied on the sea for their livelihood all day long. Speaking of aggressiveness, these fishermen were much more valiant than them. After all, when they encountered other fishing boats overseas, conflict was inevitable. At least they were not afraid and dared to have physical contact. Their skills were better than the security guards, so it was inevitable that they would win the competition. In a while, we'll go to Old Tony's to buy some wine. What do you want to drink? It's my treat today. Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said loudly as he looked at the people walking towards him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these people burst into even louder cheers. After celebrating for about 10 minutes, Winthrop temporarily suppressed their mood because the Chelsea people had arrived. Of course, they were not here to pick a fight. As a member of this regional league, they were tough and dirty. But at the very least, their boss could still afford to lose. They still cared about their reputation. Therefore, they just came over to shake hands and say hello before leaving. Although some of the Winthrop players still had smiles on their faces, they did not ridicule the other party too much. After all, they were all from the neighboring town and would see each other often. There was no need to make things worse because of a competition. Moreover, they were not mortal enemies. You did a great job today. Congratulations. The Chelsea boss and captain shook hands with the Winthrop captain and said with a smile. Hearing what he said, the captain naturally smiled and replied with a few words. After a few simple greetings, the man walked to Jiang Hai's side. While he was sizing up Jiang Hai was also sizing up the guy. According to Delilah's introduction, the other team's captain was not simple. But it looked like there was no difference. This guy was about 1.78 meters tall, which was not considered tall in the United States. He looked to be in his 30s with a blonde buzz cut. His face had a sense of vicissitudes. He was not handsome, definitely not handsome. He could only be said to be very ordinary. But such an ordinary person had a great reputation around here. Of course, this reputation was not very good. How could a gambler have a good reputation? Hello, my name is Kristen Adis. I run a casino in Chelsea. If you are interested, you can come and play. After sizing up the other person's hand, Kristen Adis could not help but stretch out his hand and said to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai, nice to meet you, but I don't have much talent for gambling. Looking at his outstretched hand, Jiang Hai shook it and then said with a smile. Hearing that Jiang Hai had no intention of getting to know him, Kristen Adis did not care. After shrugging, he said goodbye to his teammates and left with his men. Jiang, this guy is not a good person. It's best not to get too close to him in the future. Looking at the leaving Kristen Adis, Serge came over and whispered to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. In fact, needless to say, he also knew that this guy was not a good person. Well, let's forget about him, let's go celebrate. For Jiang Hai, it is impossible for him to take the initiative to gamble, so this person is probably just a passerby with him. Turning his head, Jiang Hai looked at the crowd behind him and said loudly, Wow! As soon as they heard Jiang Hai say that he was going to celebrate, everyone naturally wouldn't be polite and shouted loudly. Then Jiang Hai and others drove together and left Boston. They first went to Old Tony's Cowboy Song Bar in Winthrop. There, they moved a lot of beer and some good quality wine to Serge's house. At this time, Serge's house was already prepared. There were barbecue racks and cured meat. After ordering 10 large portions of pizza, the party officially began. In the warehouse mixed with engine oil, the young people were having a good time, drinking beer and eating barbecue, but there was no noisy music. There was originally music, but because Serge knew that Jiang Hai didn't like it, she canceled it. However, although there was no music, the atmosphere at the scene was still quite lively. Jiang Hai took a large bottle of beer and a large plate of barbecue meat, then went to a corner to eat. Although he wanted to integrate into this town, he was not familiar with it. To be honest, he was still not familiar with this place. He was not very good at making friends with strangers. What are you doing here alone? However, at this time, Delia couldn't help but smile as she walked over. She held a bottle of cocktail in her hand and sat beside Jiang Hai. This kind of cocktail was actually a pre-mixed cocktail. It was still very popular in the country, like the famous Ru-Ao. Jiang Hai had drunk it before, but this was the United States, while Ru-Ao was from Japan. Here, people preferred to drink Bacardi. Of course, this kind of cocktail was also sold in the country. The red and green color was very beautiful. The taste is also good and it is very popular with women, but Jiang Hai does not like to drink this kind of wine. He prefers to drink beer. I don't know anyone, so I'm here to fill my stomach first. Looking at Delia, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Are you full? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia smiled and looked at Jiang Hai, then asked, "Almost, what's the matter?" Jiang Hai sensed that the plate of meat was finished. It was impossible to say that he was full, but at the same time, he wasn't that hungry. Looking at Delia in front of him, Jiang Hai curiously asked, "If you are full, I will take you to see something." Delia finished speaking, stood up with a smile, and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai was also a little curious. What is there to see? So after hesitating for a moment, he put down the beer glass and plate in his hand and followed Delia. Delia led Jiang Hai through the crowd without attracting anyone's attention. She led Jiang Hai straight to the second floor of the factory. But as soon as they came up, Jiang Hai was stunned. Because at the corner of the second floor, a man and a woman were kissing passionately. The man's upper body was already red, and the woman's coat had been thrown far away. The man's hands were also reaching into the woman's clothes. They should be warming up, it seems. After the two saw Jiang Hai coming, they did not care about Jiang Hai and were still kissing passionately. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai felt a bit guilty. The reason he followed Delia was because it was daytime. He didn't think that Delia would do anything to him during the day. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai was curious about the second reason. But now, it seemed like he had underestimated Delia. Jiang Hai was a bit surprised. But now, it seemed like he had underestimated Delia. Okay, let's do it here. I want to show yous. Just as Jiang Hai was hesitating whether to run or not, Delia suddenly stopped in front of him and pulled Jiang Hai into the bathroom on the second floor. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, she instantly lifted her top, and then two abnormally plump breasts appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes drifted elsewhere. Delia, it's not good for you to do this. You have a boyfriend, and you know my situation. It's impossible between you and me. If something happens, I won't be able to explain it to old George. Feeling Delia's footsteps, Jiang Hai could not help but take a step back. Then he looked to the side and said seriously, "Hey, Jiang, I don't want to have any emotional disputes with you. I still love my new boyfriend very much, at least for now. I know you're not a good person, so I don't want to be your girlfriend. I'm just interested in you, so you don't need to feel burdened. If you want to fit in with us, you need to let go." Chapter 627. Cough, that's not right. Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai took another step back, his body even leaning against the door. It was the first time he had been so passive, and it was indeed somewhat baffling. "I'm already 19 years old. I became an adult last year, so I don't need you to tell me what's right and what's wrong. Feel it? Don't you like it?" Looking at Jiang Hai's old-fashioned appearance, Delia could not help but smile. She had heard before that Easterners were still very concerned about this thing and were not as open-minded as Westerners. Now it seemed that Jiang Hai was a very traditional young man. As she spoke, she had already taken a step forward and pulled Jiang Hai's hands with both hands, placing them on two places where they should not be placed. At the same time, her hands also placed on the things that Jiang Hai should not be placing on. Wow, this shape, it can't be. But as soon as her hands touched, Delia could not help but exclaim, "Don't." Feeling Delia's movements, Jiang Hai immediately wanted to stop her, but unfortunately, Delia had already taken off Jiang Hai's pants. For the first time, Jiang Hai felt that wearing pants without a belt was not very good, but the instant chill made him understand that his existence had already been seen by Delia. Looking at the behemoth in front of her, Delia swallowed her saliva. Delia swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Then, without giving Jiang Hai a chance to resist, she knelt down and lowered her head. Hiss. Feeling that different feeling, Jiang Hai could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. And in his mind, the impulse brought about by the Dragon Balls was about to devour him. Jiang Hai was originally not a person who could not control himself, but ever since he had the Dragon Balls, his desire for more and more increased. His needs in this area were getting higher and higher, and he was getting less and less able to control himself. This might be the only side effect of the Dragon Balls. If Delia and Kelly had talked it over, then Jiang Hai might not have had any problems. Just like the day before yesterday, Although they had made it clear and hinted so many times, Jiang Hai was still able to get away. But when the other party forced herself on him, Jiang Hai was stunned, and his rationality would be instantly swallowed by his desire. It was not until he turned into sage mode that his rationality returned. Of course, he was sober at this time, but his desire was really too strong. It was the same this time. In less than 3 minutes, Delia found that Jiang Hai's waist began to move, which made her delighted. But after more than 10 minutes, Delia discovered that Jiang Hai didn't seem to have any intention of turning into sage mode. I can't, my mouth is so sore. After forcibly pushing Jiang Hai away, Delia half knelt on the ground and said to Jiang Hai somewhat pitifully. However, Jiang Hai did not recover, but his consciousness was still there, and he knew that she was telling the truth. And now, it seemed to be a good time to start directly. Then Jiang Hai pulled her up, let her support her hands against the wall, and then removed the things she could not describe, and then did it in one go. Wow, two inside, don't you wear a raincoat? Feeling Jiang Hai's movements, Delia could not help but exclaim in a low voice, and then said with some worry, "Are you afraid of being sick?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. No one had ever said this to him before. That's not it. A rich person like you would definitely not let yourself be sick, but I'm afraid of having a baby. If I give birth to a yellow man in the future, how can I explain it? I have a boyfriend, Delia said softly as she glanced at Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai ignored her and began to move. Just get it outside in a while. Jiang Hai whispered to Delia as he continued to move. Looking at Jiang Hai, Delia whispered into Jiang Hai's ear, "Get it into my mouth, I like it." Next was the part that could not be described, although there were many parts above that could not be described. But when Jiang Hai did things, he always needed some impulse and passion, and these were the ones. Sometimes, people would feel that time passed very slowly, and sometimes it would feel that time passed very quickly. Just like when doing this kind of thing, time passed very quickly. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. When Jiang Hai resisted and came out, Delia's mouth, when he thought of the key words, he also let out a long sigh and then sat weakly on the toilet next to him. As for Delia, she had already lost all her strength. After swallowing a mouthful, she wiped her face and the corner of her mouth with her hand, and then gently licked them clean. Then she sat on the ground, constantly panting. "Are you okay?" Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai asked softly. Now that he had returned to his saintly state, he felt that he had done something wrong. After all, Delia's father knew him, and she was someone else's girlfriend. As for what other people would do if they encountered such a thing, Jiang Hai did not know, but he felt somewhat guilty. "It's okay, it's really great. It's the best experience I've ever had. Jiang Hai, you're really a perfect lover." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia raised her thumb and said with a look of approval. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also felt a little awkward. At this time, no matter how he replied, it seemed that it would be wrong. "Hey, Delia, how do you want me to say this? After all, you have a boyfriend, and I know your father. I said before, I can't give you anything. Of course, if you want to buy something, you can look for me." Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai helplessly sighed. "What is this called? I'm also making money now." "Huh, Jiang, I have to admit that you're really cute. I don't want anything when I do this with you. This is the United States, and this is very normal. I want to integrate into our lives, so you need to try to understand us." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Delia could not help but smile. Then she slowly stood up and came to Jiang Hai's side, sitting directly on Jiang Hai's lap. At the same time, her pair of plump breasts pressed against Jiang Hai's chin. In America, it's normal for friends to occasionally do unspeakable things. Everyone needs to vent. Men need to do it, and so do women. So, if you're not looking for someone with a clear goal, there's nothing wrong with it. That's why we still know how to restrain ourselves. When our father was young, in the 1980s, Americans were the most open-minded. I heard that hormones were everywhere at that time, and the relationships between men and women were so messy that it made one's hair stand on end. Even within the same family, it was quite common for cousins to have sex. Of course, You couldn't have babies. Of course, it's not possible to have children. Looking at Jiang Hai, Delia smiled and said, Indeed, men and women in the United States did not pay much attention to these things. Many men and women had already done it when they were in junior high school. Of course, there was no junior high school in the United States. Junior high school and high school were connected. There were also schools that were connected to junior high school, and elementary school. But at that time, exploration of the opposite sex was not rare in the United States. On the contrary, there were not many people in the United States who had psychological burdens like Jiang Hai. Of course, those with ulterior motives were different. Hearing Delia's words, Jiang Hai could not help but be speechless. What kind of fallacy is this? Messing around with men and women became an important node for me to integrate into this small town? It's too much of a joke. Okay, don't feel burdened. Let me hug you for a while. I'm really tired and I don't want to leave you. Feeling that Jiang Hai's mood might be a little better, Delia also hugged Jiang Hai's head and said with a smile, Kaka. At this moment, there was suddenly the sound of a key turning outside the bathroom door. It startled Jiang Hai, but at this time, there was nothing in the bathroom at all. What should he do? Before he could figure it out, the door had been opened. Then Kelly Soren's little face, which was a little red from wine, appeared outside the door. After seeing Jiang Hai and Delia inside, she could not help but glare at them bitterly. Then, in a flash, she entered the bathroom, locked the door behind her, and walked quickly to the two. Hey, Delia, you already have a boyfriend. Why are you still clinging to Jiang Hai? Grabbing Delia's arm, Kelly Soren directly pulled her up from Jiang Hai's body, then looked at her and said with a displeased expression, Hey, dear Kelly, we're just hugging each other for warmth. I'll help you try it. I have to tell you, Jiang Hai really has this. That's great. Looking at the angry Kelly, Delia chuckled and then gave Kelly a thumbs up. Of course, she was talking about Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Kelly could not help but raise her eyebrows. She glanced at Jiang Hai's naked lower body and looked at Jiang Hai with some complaints. Then, she sat on Jiang Hai's lap and took off her shirt in an instant. Since you said you're helping me try it, then I'll try it myself. Looking at the dazed Jiang Hai in front of her, Kelly said fiercely. Then, she pulled Jiang Hai's face with both hands and kissed him directly. Feeling Kelly's breath and the taste of alcohol in his mouth, Jiang Hai reacted. He was just about to push her away, but his hand was grabbed by Delia. Of course, my friend, I'm here to help you. Looking at Delia's smile, Jiang Hai felt that it would be difficult for him to escape unscathed. When Delia pressed Jiang Hai's hand on the two places on Kelly's body that could not be described, Jiang Hai felt that he seemed to be unable to control himself again. Perhaps, as they said, he wanted to integrate into the other party's world. First, he wanted the other party to have similar habits, and their habits toward Jiang Hai were obviously not so pure. But as a man, in the face of such habits, Jiang Hai could not say anything because he did not know who was taking advantage of him. Chapter 628. You're back, why are you so late? Seeing Jiang Hai walk in, Bernice, who was leaning on the sofa and eating blue plums, asked with some confusion. As she spoke, she stuffed a few more blue plums into her mouth. Her fingertips and mouth were bluish-purple, as if she was poisoned, but Jiang Hai didn't have the time to make fun of her today. Oh, I drank a little too much at noon, so I rested at his place. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai smiled, walked to the sofa, then sat down directly, looked up at the light, and then slowly looked back at his big fish tank. What's wrong? Haven't you recovered yet? Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice couldn't help but ask Jiang Hai with some confusion. No, I've recovered, but there are some? Well, I don't quite understand. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai immediately raised his head and said with a chuckle. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai was still a little flustered. He went to watch the game today, then went to Chelsea's place, and what he did, there was no need to say. With Kelly joining the battle later, Jiang Hai and the others stayed in the bathroom upstairs for an entire afternoon. Fortunately, Chelsea's house has a total of 4 bathrooms, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs, 1 in the warehouse, and 1 in the reception room. Otherwise, they would be suffocated. By the time Jiang Hai helped Kelly and Delia out, it was already past 6 o'clock in the evening. Most people had already left, and the owner, Celsi, also drank too much and collapsed on the sofa. Jiang Hai didn't say much and helped the two leave. Of course, he only came back after sending them back to their respective homes. But even though he came back, Jiang Hai was still a little confused about what Kelly and Delia said this afternoon. What do you not understand? Tell me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice turned around and looked at Jiang Hai with some confusion. Looking at her, Jiang Hai also turned his head and looked at Bernice. He thought about it in his mind. Maybe if he talked to Bernice, she might give him an answer. It's like this: I've been trying to integrate with the people in the town recently, but I found out today that I'm really different from the people in the town. I can tolerate other things, but the problem is that I can't accept fighting. It's like the Americans are very relaxed about fighting. They don't have much sense of moral betrayal, which makes me a little puzzled. Looking at Bernice, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. He didn't tell the complete truth, but she should be able to understand if he said it this way. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice's face suddenly turned red. She was still a young girl. She was still a little uncomfortable when Jiang Hai asked her such things, but she was asking for it. If she didn't answer, it didn't seem too good. So after a little hesitation, she explained to Jiang Hai. Let's talk about education in America. Let's talk about the education in China and the United States. In the United States, there are two types of education. One is similar to the education you see today, a pure American education. They will teach the children about combat when they are very young to prevent any problems. But it is also because of this that the children in the United States are very curious about this aspect. When their physical conditions allow it, they may try it. Bernice thought for a moment and said hesitantly. As she said, education in this area was indeed very early in the United States, but it also developed into two extremes. One kind was the Catholic family. They were very strict about fighting because in their view, if one's body was impure or had an abortion, they would die without a burial place. Therefore, generally speaking, the Catholic family was very strict about this aspect. But most ordinary American families were very casual about the management in this area. They didn't care about their children knowing the other half when they were 13 or 14 years old. Of course, they had to be prepared for it. Although Catholicism was the world's largest religion, there were definitely not many people who didn't believe in it. This created the mainstream impression in the United States. Huaxia had always been very conservative in this area. They began to set up education in this area after high school, so the current environment in the country was very chaotic. But in fact, after graduating from high school, most of the boys and girls in the country had not fought before. At least 70% of them had not fought before. But in the United States, more than 80% of them had fought before. This was also one of the reasons why the media in the two countries criticized each other. The domestic media would say that the combat education in the West was earlier and more advanced. It could let the children know more, and this was beneficial for the children's development. On the other hand, the Western media would criticize their own government for introducing combat education too early. This would make the children develop a bad interest and curiosity in these things, and thus, they would try it out. This was not beneficial to the children's development. Of course, both sides had their reasons. This was only the media's criticism. After all, foreign things could not be forced on a country. For example, if the same thing was used on Huaxia in the United States, Huaxia would probably be in chaos. Because people had too much power, they would become arrogant. Huaxia had never lacked ambitious people since ancient times, and it was hard to say whether they would use proper means to obtain the power they wanted. So Huaxia would be in chaos. And if the same thing was used on the United States in the Huaxia, the United States would also be in chaos. The Americans were used to freedom. If you suddenly asked them to pay for their own medical care, pension insurance, and social welfare, and if they lost their jobs, they would have to find a job themselves. Every day, they would have to work hard for a few square meters of house. They would definitely rebel. Therefore, different national conditions meant different natural environments. However, Jiang Hai was now a Huaxia citizen in the United States. Since he had to find a way to integrate into this country, it would be very troublesome. Otherwise, he would have to abandon the habits he had developed in the country all these years and integrate into the country like an American. But he was not willing to do so. He had some things on him that he would not throw away no matter what. But this collision of Eastern and Western cultures really made him feel a little overwhelmed. In the United States, this Western world, before a man and a woman were married, the restrictions on each other were not very strict. Things like Delias were very common. After all, they did not get along with each other for the purpose of marriage. But in China, since a man and a woman had confirmed their relationship, if one of them cheated, it would be a big mistake. Who would play it down like this? Unless it was those white-collar workers who pursued a one-night stand or something like that. Otherwise, why would someone act like this? Jiang Hai was not a white-collar worker. He would not pursue a one-night stand or anything like that. He did not lack women. This kind of cultural shock really made him feel a little overwhelmed. That was why he asked Bernice. But after a long time, Bernice still could not explain it clearly. Because she did not really understand these things. Hey, after a long time, you still don't understand. In short, if you feel that there is a way to integrate into this group and you are willing to do it, then you can give it a try. For example, go to a party or watch their football game. These are also things that I want you to do. But if you have some doubts about some things, then you don't have to follow the American attitude. For example, this thing, understand? Seeing that Jiang Hai had listened to her for a long time and still had some confusion in his eyes, Bernice pursed her lips. In fact, she had already started scolding him in her heart. This Jiang Hai was really annoying. Did he not know that she was a big girl? How shy would she be if he asked her that? Although she was used to learning Chinese and Western culture, she was still a traditional Huaxia girl in her bones. After saying so much, she felt that she had already broken through her limits. But if she did not explain it clearly, she was afraid that Jiang Hai would mess around. So after saying that last sentence, Bernice stood up. She did not care about the pot of blue plum beside her and directly ran back to her room. She needed to digest it properly. If I'm willing to try, I can try. If I'm not willing to try, can I not try? This seems to work. Jiang Hai took out a few blue plums from the big bowl and threw them into his mouth. As he ate, he muttered softly. He felt that he wasn't himself this afternoon. This wasn't good news. Unknowingly, this was what Jiang Hai was thinking. He sat on the sofa and ate the blue plums while unconsciously watching the TV in front of him. Aphrodite and the others did not come over tonight. There was no one else in Jiang Hai's room, so he had a lot of time to think about some things. After an unknown amount of time, when the last blue plum was thrown into Jiang Hai's mouth, he could not help but shudder. After that, Jiang Hai felt a little strange. With his physical fitness, why would he shudder? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai could not help but look into the distance. In the end, he happened to see the living room's window flapping in the wind. Looking through the window, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but brighten. He only saw that the large expanse of snowflakes had fallen from the sky at some point. The entire world had unknowingly changed into a white coat. Putting the bowl aside, Jiang Hai stood up and walked to the window. He glanced at the snow on the windowsill. It was almost 2 or 3 centimeters thick. Looking out again, it was pitch black. Not to mention stars, there was not even a moon tonight. Oh, it's snowing. And it looks like it won't be small. Looking at the pitch-black sky outside, Jiang Hai's face showed a smile for the first time since he returned home. He was still very familiar with such a scene. Because his hometown would also have such heavy snow at this time, but now his home was in Winthrop. Chapter 629. Boston was not very good at this point. It got cold too quickly. In fact, Boston's latitude was about 41 degrees, which was the same as the latitude of the imperial capital in China. But when it started to get cold here, it was almost the same as Jiang Hai's hometown, Bingqing. In many countries, the first snow actually had a lot of meaning, but for Jiang Hai, snow was just snow. It had no meaning. After seeing the snow last night, Jiang Hai closed all the windows and turned on the geothermal. But even so, he didn't sleep very well this night. After all, the windows had been open for a long time. When they were suddenly closed, he really felt a little suffocated. It was rare for Jiang Hai to wake up at 6 o'clock again. But at 6 o'clock in Boston, the sky had just begun to brighten. He opened the bedroom window to let some air in. As soon as the window was opened, the cold wind rushed in instantly. It was so cold that Jiang Hai couldn't help but shiver. The weapon under his crotch couldn't help but twitch. Hiss, it's really strong, but it seems that winter is here. Looking at the white expanse outside the snow, Jiang Hai couldn't help but whisper. Although he was a northerner, he obviously liked summer more than winter. Shrinking his neck, Jiang Hai went to the bathroom to wash up, then changed his clothes and went downstairs. He found that little Huang and Xiao Bai were a little lazy today, but Jiang Hai didn't care about them and opened the door directly. When the door opened, the cold wind poured into Jiang Hai's villa in an instant. At this time, little Huang, Xiao Bai, and Qiu, who were sleeping on the warm floor, reacted almost instantly. They looked at Jiang Hai with resentment. This guy is too annoying. After getting used to it, Jiang Hai simply stretched, exhaled a breath of white air, and prepared to go to the warehouse at the cowshed. Recently, he had to go to the warehouse every morning to help bale grass. Although he was the boss, he couldn't just do nothing, right? But before he left, he saw Robbins Garcia and the others coming out of the warehouse with some things. "Hi, Robbins Garcia, aren't you bale grass today?" Seeing them come over, Jiang Hai couldn't help but ask with some doubts. "The boss, where are we going to get grass?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia glanced around, then said helplessly. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was also dumbfounded for a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly. "Yes, it's snowing everywhere, where are we going to find grass?" Thinking of this, he felt a little awkward in the air. "By the way, boss, let's help you clear the ground here first." Maybe he felt Jiang Hai's awkwardness. As a qualified lackey, Robbins Garcia immediately changed the topic and said with a serious face, "The snow is not very thick, there's no need to clear it." He raised his feet and looked. Although the snow last night was not light, it was not particularly heavy. After all, it was just the first snow. Although Jiang Hai did not eat fried chicken or drink beer, the snow was indeed not heavy. Now it looks like it's only 3 or 4 centimeters thick, which is far worse than last winter. It's because the snow is thin that we need to deal with it immediately because the weather is not that cold. Today's weather forecast said that it will be 13 degrees. The snow will turn into water at noon, and then it will freeze again at night before it dries. Robbins Garcia said to Jiang Hai when he heard Jiang Hai's words. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, after the snow turns into water, it will be troublesome when it freezes again. Jiang Hai also doesn't want his house to be so slippery, so he immediately agreed and picked up a broom to help. When it first snowed last year, it was already the end of November, and the first snow at that time was quite heavy. A broom was not very useful in that kind of snow, but now there is only a few centimeters of thin snow, so a broom is the best thing. On the contrary, shovels and the like are not very effective. The grassland does not care whether there is snow or not, so Jiang Hai only needs to clear the road and the parking lot in front of the house. Today, Edward Anderson and the others are not in a hurry to go to the dock. They all came to help. It is said that there is strength in numbers, and this is really true. Jiang Hai and the others started sweeping at 6 o'clock, and they were all done by about 8 o'clock. Jiang Hai also deliberately drove the helicopter around the manor with Marlon Rupert. After making sure that there is no road left unswept, he returned home. When he returned home, Bernice, Xiaoya, Daliana, Marian, and Azalina were already up. Xiaoya had also prepared breakfast. Everyone gathered around the table and started eating. When did it snow last night? It actually snowed so heavily. While eating Xiaoya's wontons, Bernice asked with some doubts. She didn't notice that it was snowing outside when she went to bed last night. "You just left not long ago, I don't remember." Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai recalled for a moment. He also forgot when Bernice left. He only remembered that after seeing the snow, he went upstairs to sleep. "It's snowing today, do you have any activities?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice asked with a smile. I don't think so, just stay at home. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai curled his lips. He had to admit that during the summer, Jiang Hai wasn't too idle. He still had some things to do. But when it came to winter, he really didn't have anything to do. Last winter, he played basketball and fished for the whole winter. But last year, he was alone, so it didn't matter. This year, there were so many people around him, so he couldn't play basketball and fish. Moreover, after that addiction passed, he didn't like these two hobbies so much. If you ask him now what he is going to do in winter, he is a little confused because he doesn't know what he is going to do. If you have nothing to do today, let's go make tanghulu. Seeing that Jiang Hai had nothing to do, Bernice thought for a moment and suddenly said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her proposal, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then touched his chin. This is also okay. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai felt that making tanghulu was not bad. Tanghulu is a traditional snack of Huaxia. It is available all over the country. He believes that people in Huaxia are not unfamiliar with this snack. The method is also very simple. Use a bamboo stick to skewer the fruit you want to eat. The most common one is mountain dregs. Of course, there are many different kinds now, such as grapes, kiwi, peaches, apples, oranges, grass, and so on. There are all kinds of fruits. Then use the boiled sugar to cook it, and then cool it down. It is very delicious. However, in terms of cooling, one thing was very important, and that was to freeze it. The taste of frozen candied haws was very different from that of unfrozen ones. But if you put these candied haws in the cold storage or the refrigerator, the effect wouldn't be very good. The best effect was to use the weather to freeze it. Then the taste would be quite good. In fact, Bernice said that she wanted to eat this thing in the autumn. This was because Jiang Hai had a lot of fruit trees. Autumn was the time to harvest them. Looking at those fruits, she was a little greedy. But at that time, the weather wasn't cold enough, so Jiang Hai didn't do it. Now that the weather was cold, it was possible to do it. Great, then let's eat together. Hearing that Jiang Hai agreed to make it, Bernice couldn't help but smile. Then she said to the girls next to her. Hearing Bernice's words, Xiaoya was very excited because she has eaten it before. But Delina and Marian looked at each other. They really haven't eaten this thing before. But seeing Bernice and Xiaoya's excited appearance, they were also very interested. Only Azalina shrugged her shoulders. She had eaten this thing before, but she didn't think that it was delicious. But since everyone wanted to make it, she was no exception. Since everyone agreed to do this, everyone's eating speed increased a lot. After eating, Jiang Hai and Bernice went to the warehouse where the fruits were stored to see what they were going to do with it. Jiang Hai liked to eat fruits, and because of the spiritual qi here, the fruits were growing quite well. Although he didn't intend to sell fruits, he planted a lot of them at home. Hawthorns, blue plums, kiwis, nectarines, cherries, and so on. He had everything. Looking at these fruits, Bernice's appetite was aroused. After looking around, Jiang Hai picked up a lot of things to eat. Then he carried them back to the villa. After bringing the fruits back, they began to prepare. Removing the seeds and peeling, these things didn't need Jiang Hai's help as Bernice already knew. But there was a problem. They didn't have any bamboo sticks or rock candy. This gave the girls a headache. I'll go to the town. But Jiang Hai didn't care. Then he decided to go to the town and see if he could buy it. He knew that he could buy bamboo sticks. This was because in the United States, some people like to eat barbecued meat with bamboo sticks. It was said that people from the Middle East and Huaxia spread the news. During the last barbecue party, Jiang Hai ate a lot of barbecued meat with bamboo sticks. So he could definitely buy bamboo sticks. But for rock candy, he would have to try his luck. Americans like to eat sugar, granulated sugar, soft sugar, caramel sugar, maple sugar. They like to eat all kinds of sugar. But Jiang Hai wasn't sure if there was any rock sugar in the United States. So after talking to everyone, Jiang Hai drove to the town. When his car drove out of the manor, he saw a cleaning truck on the road of the town. After giving way to the snow removal truck, Jiang Hai drove into the town. But as soon as he entered, he found that the town was very busy. At this time, everyone was cleaning up the snow from yesterday. It seems that except for the time when the town was being renovated, there wasn't such a busy time. When they saw Jiang Hai again, they didn't know if it was because Jiang Hai had participated in the two parties and went to watch the town's football team play. This time, when Jiang Hai came to the town, at least the young people were more friendly to Jiang Hai. Some people began to take the initiative to greet Jiang Hai. This was a good start. After parking the car in the parking lot, Jiang Hai tightened his clothes and went to a supermarket on the business street. Supermarket was the abbreviation for supermarket, but in fact, this was not a supermarket. It was more like a convenience store. But even so, the daily sales here weren't low. Even if it was winter in Winthrop, there were still some people who came here to play. At least in this shop, there were more than a dozen people buying things. Many of them were Huaxia people. In addition to buying some daily necessities, many Huaxia people would also take some cigarettes here when they left. This was a habit of the Chinese people. Although Jiang Hai did not smoke, he had some understanding of the cigarettes in the United States. When it came to cigarettes in the United States, 9 out of 10 people would think of Marlboro. But in fact, Marlboro was a Swiss brand and had nothing to do with the United States. But the sales in the United States were the highest. In the United States, the most popular cigarette brand was Camel, followed by Winston, Good Fortune, and another brand called American Spirit. There was a picture of a smoking Native American on the outside of the cigarette box. It was said that this type of cigarette did not contain any essence and was made from pure tobacco leaves. It was very popular in the United States, but it was also very strong. Other than American Spirit, the best-selling cigarette was White Marlboro. At this time, the Huaxia tourists in the shop were all picking cigarettes. Each person could only bring 2 cigarettes back to China, so there were not many choices. This shop was Jiang Hai's shop. He rented it, so when Jiang Hai walked in, he was stopped by the shop manager. "Hi, Jiang, you are here. What do you want to buy?" Seeing Jiang Hai walk in, the shop manager, a bearded man, said with a smile. His current life was closely related to Jiang Hai. Moreover, he also heard that Jiang Hai wanted to integrate into this place. Therefore, he would not be stingy to show his goodwill. "Oh, hello, you are Luo Lin." Seeing the bearded shop manager come over to greet him, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. After thinking for a long time, he did not call out this person's name. Indeed, he was not familiar with the people in Winthrop. "Luo Lin Canal. It's good that you remember my name. Is there anything you want to buy?" Hearing that Jiang Hai still remembered that his name was Luo Lin, the big bearded man was very happy. He asked Jiang Hai with a happy face. Chapter 630. Let me ask, do you have any bamboo sticks and rock candy? Hearing Luo Lin's words, Jiang Hai also chuckled. He had to admit that sometimes these Americans were quite friendly. He glanced at the supermarket and said to Luo Lin, "Bamboo sticks? Wooden sticks, right? They're inside. As for rock candy, what kind? Drink?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Luo Lin froze for a moment, then whispered to Jiang Hai. Looking at his mysterious appearance, Jiang Hai was also somewhat at a loss. There is a word in English for rock candy, but this word is not as beautiful as imagined. In China, rock candy was rock candy. Everyone would know what it was. But in the United States, rock candy was written in English as candy. It meant candy, or fancy clothing, or sweet words. There was also another explanation, which was gu ku 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 ku, and so on. So when he heard Jiang Hai say that he wanted this thing, Luo Lin also gestured with his hands. "Oh no, I don't touch these things. I want to eat rock candy. Whole, translucent candy. Put it in your mouth and eat it." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately shook his head. "He will not touch these messy things." You scared me. The candy is in the 3rd row. You can go look for it. I don't know if it's there or not." Seeing that Jiang Hai did not look for those things, Luo Lin also breathed a sigh of relief. Although in the United States, there are places where smoking marijuana is not illegal, but these drugs are illegal everywhere. Plus, these are not good things. He does not want Jiang Hai to be involved in these things. Smiling at him, Jiang Hai walked to the corner of the 3rd row. As a result, he found that there were a lot of sweets and all kinds of sweets. Americans really like to eat sweets. They really like to eat sweets. Every year, the average adult in the country absorbs 22 spoons of sweets every day, which is more than 100 grams, which is about 2 ounces. That's an average of every day, not every month, not every year. Maybe Americans don't know what healthcare is, or maybe they really like to eat candy and have immunity. Otherwise, how can they not be afraid of diabetes? As for teenagers, well, they eat candy even more fiercely, 34 spoons a day. Almost all of their snacks are sweet, not to mention the national food pie, donuts, chocolate, and so on. These high-calorie, high-sugar foods are their favorite. This can be seen from the variety of candies here. Jiang Hai walked to the counter and squatted down to take a look. He found rock candy here, which saves a lot of trouble. He took 2 bags of rock candy and went to the side to get bamboo skewers. Oh no, wooden skewers. There is almost no bamboo in the United States, and they do not use bamboo. Among the 3 major types of bamboo in the world, Asian bamboo is the most widely used. American bamboo only grows in Latin America. Even if there is bamboo in the United States, it is very rare and no one will cut it. But it does not matter if he uses wooden skewers. After getting the candy and wooden skewers, Jiang Hai was about to pay the bill. But when he passed by the counter, he saw a shelf selling drinks. So, Jiang Hai took a bottle of Coca-Cola 0 degrees. A long time ago, he liked drinking 0 degrees. When this drink was launched, it attracted a lot of attention. But later, it was unknown if it was because of the suppression of the industry, or if there was really a problem, but the aspartame used in 0 degrees was exposed as a cancer-causing substance. For a period of time, it was taken off the shelves all over the world. But later, for some reason, it reappeared. Jiang Hai did not know whether it was cancer-causing or not, but Jiang Hai knew that it did not have many calories, so it was fine to drink. Jiang Hai took the 3 items to the counter and was about to pay the bill. But at that moment, a man in Indian clothing walked in and stood behind Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was familiar with this man. He was an Iroquois. When Jiang Hai and Mayor Wallace were discussing setting up a Native American store in the town, Mayor Wallace went to the mountains and met with the Iroquois. Then, he came forward to facilitate this matter. This Iroquois was the most business-minded among the Iroquois tribe in the mountains. When he heard about this, he persuaded the chief of his tribe to come out of the mountains and become the manager of this small store. Indeed, if an Indian store was not being sold by a Native American, it would more or less give people the impression that it was selling dog meat under false pretenses. It was because of this Iroquois that the store's business was quite good. According to Moses Adams' calculations, the Indian store's total revenue in the 3 months of August, September, and October alone was $700,000. After deducting the $200,000 spent on purchasing goods, the store made a net profit of $500,000. Jiang Hai got 40%, which was $200,000. The town got 20%, which was $100,000, and the Iroquois got 40%, which was $200,000. Of course, the most important thing was that these goods were all bought from the Iroquois. In other words, they had earned a total of $400,000. This Iroquois, who was always in the limelight, naturally made a lot of money. Originally, he had rented a house to live in, but recently, Jiang Hai heard that he was going to buy a house in town. Hey, Jiang, you're here to buy something too? While Jiang Hai was sizing him up, the Iroquois, who had been looking up as if he was thinking about what to buy, also noticed Jiang Hai. He called out excitedly, but his accent was a little strange. Yes, you're here to buy something too. Although his accent was a little strange, Jiang Hai still understood what he was saying. I ran out of cigarettes, so I came to buy some. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man could not help but smile and say. When this man came, Jiang Hai remembered that he was reluctant to buy cigarettes. Instead, he just rolled up the tobacco leaves he brought from the mountains to smoke. Although it was strong and natural, it was not very comfortable to smoke. His mouth was full of smoke. Now that he had money, he naturally wanted to buy something better. When Jiang Hai heard him, he smiled and chatted with him. After chatting for a while, it was Jiang Hai's turn. After paying for these things, Jiang Hai left the supermarket. He opened the can of Coke and took a sip. After a while, he took a big gulp. It was indeed much more comfortable. As he walked, Jiang Hai drank. As for the people on the road, they kept saying hello to Jiang Hai. For their kindness, Jiang Hai responded to them with a smile. Unknowingly, he also walked to the parking lot. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai drove back to the manor. When he came, there was still some snow on the road. Although the snowplow swept more snow to the roadside, there was still some snow in the middle of the road. At this time, when the sun came out, the snow became water. It was fine to walk now, but if it froze at night, it would be troublesome. Looking at the situation on the road, Jiang Hai felt that if there was nothing important, he should not go to the town these days. After driving all the way back to his manor, Jiang Hai got out of the car and took the things into the house. At this time, Daliana and the others had already finished preparing the fruits. Logically speaking, when skewering candied haws, such as hawthorn, the hawthorn should be cut from the middle, then the seeds inside should be removed, and then the hawthorn should be closed. Then, the hawthorn should be skewered with bamboo sticks. There was a problem with skewers, and that was, the butt of the hawthorn would not be delicious. Therefore, what Bernice and the others did was to use chopsticks to stab the hawthorn through its butt. This way, the seeds would be directly removed, and the butt would also fall. Although there would be less meat, it was not a big deal. As for the other things, it was much simpler. The grapes were peeled and seeded, the kiwis were peeled and cut into small pieces, the blue plum was peeled and seeded, and the grass was directly cut in half. When Jiang Hai came back, these things were almost done. Seeing that Jiang Hai came back with the wooden stick, the others also began to skewer the fruits. Unknowingly, they had already skewered dozens of skewers. There were not many hawthorn skewers left, so Jiang Hai began to boil the sugar. This was the most difficult part of making candied haws. The ratio of sugar to water was 2:1, and the mixture was poured into the pot and boiled for about 20 minutes. There must be granulated sugar and rock sugar in the sugar, and it must be boiled for 20 minutes. During the boiling, it must be stirred constantly, otherwise, it would be burnt. After 20 minutes, the sugar was boiling very fiercely, and small dense bubbles had appeared, and the color had become golden yellow. At this time, it was necessary to use chopsticks to pick it to see if it could be pulled out. When making candied sweet potatoes, this kind of sugar was also used. At this time, it was necessary to turn off the heat and speed up, because it would become caramel in a while, and then there would be no way to eat it. After putting the sugar together, they quickly took the candied haws and rolled them in the sugar. After all of them were mixed, they directly put them on the marble slab to cool. Because the marble slab itself was low in temperature, it could help the candied haws take shape, and it was very slippery. When it was fixed, these candied haws could be removed. After waiting for a long time, Bernice and the others finally saw the candied haws take shape. Bernice wanted to take a piece, but she was slapped on the back of her hand by Jiang Hai. Feeling Jiang Hai's action, Bernice couldn't help but bare her fangs and brandish her claws at Jiang Hai. Now is not the time to eat, it has to be frozen for a night. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh and pat her head. Sometimes, Bernice was like a child, which really made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice couldn't help but slap her mouth, and then stared at the candied haws without moving her eyes. Well, let's play something, otherwise, it's too boring to stay at home. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said to everyone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, these girls' thoughts about the candied haws were really diverted. For a while, everyone in the room looked at each other, thinking, what should they play? Play poker, it's very simple. Glancing at Jiang Hai and others, Azalina spoke first. But there's no point in playing poker if you don't bet something. Hearing Azalina's words, Jiang Hai thought for a while and said, it's really boring to play poker without gambling. After all, the way poker is played is too simple. Then let's play aeroplane chess. Looking at each other, Delina couldn't help but say excitedly. But that thing can only be played by 4 people. But hearing her words, Bernice on the other side spoke up. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai and others fell into silence again, because they didn't know what to play. Otherwise, let's play Three Kingdoms. Just when everyone was a little helpless and didn't know what to play, Little Ye said next to them. Hearing Little Ye's words, Jiang Hai and others all looked at her. Three Kingdoms? Hearing Little Ye's words, Jiang Hai's mind couldn't help but flash a scene of him and his buddies playing the Three Kingdoms. But thinking about it, it has been a long time since he last played it. Well, Three Kingdoms, in the past, I could only stay in my room. It was boring to study recipes all the time. I couldn't watch TV or play with my mobile phone because there would be radiation, so I liked to play some board games and the like. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Little Ye said with a smile. Hearing what Little Ye said, Jiang Hai and others looked at each other. Three Kingdoms, what is it? As if seeing the eagerness in Jiang Hai and Little Ye's eyes, Delina and Marian couldn't help but ask strangely. They are pure Americans. They don't know what Three Kingdoms is, they don't even know about Three Kingdoms. Well, it's a very simple game, you will know after playing it. Hearing Delina and Marian's words, Jiang Hai also smiled, then signaled to Little Ye with his eyes. Little Ye immediately ran upstairs. Since Jiang Hai cured her disease, although Little Ye still looks very quiet, she is a lot more cheerful. In the past, because she couldn't get any sunlight, she was lacking calcium all year round. In addition, she had osteoporosis and a serious lack of all vitamins. It can be said that even if she wanted to run, she couldn't. Fortunately, because of Bernice's guidance all year round. So in her heart, she didn't have any inferiority complex or mental illness like autism. But now that Jiang Hai cured her, she is very cheerful. Now, if she can run, she will never walk. When eating and chatting with Jiang Hai and others, if she can sit under the sun, she will never sit in a shady place. Looking at her change, whether it is Jiang Hai or Bernice, in fact, they are happy in their hearts. Especially in Jiang Hai's view, the best thing he did was to cure her. Looking at Little Ye's slender and tall figure, her pure white and flawless body cough. It seems to be a bit off track. Chapter 631. I'm not playing anymore. What the hell? I'm going back to sleep. Looking at his lord who had lost 5 points of blood, Jiang Hai threw the cards in his hand into the pile of cards in front of him. He was really unlucky tonight. Jiang Hai and the others started playing after they said they were going to play the Three Kingdoms tonight. However, Jiang Hai was absolutely unlucky tonight. He took Zhang Fei, but he didn't have a single killer card. He took Guan Yu, but he didn't have a single red card. He took Shen Ji, but she had a red card. He took Huang Yueying, but he didn't have a brocade card. He took De Qiao, but she didn't have a diamond card. He took Sun Quan, but he didn't have a single flash card in his hand. Bernice, who was sitting next to him, used a yellow bell. Then, she equipped a repeating crossbow and -1 horse. Well, there was no need to play at all. Just like that, in 2 rounds, Jiang Hai was finished with 5 drops of HP. Jiang, you're playing too badly. Daliana, who was the loyal minister this time, looked at Jiang Hai helplessly. Because it was a 6-person game, there was a master, a concubine, a loyal minister, and a traitor. Unfortunately, she really couldn't win. It's because my cards are bad. You don't understand. Forget it. Go back to sleep. Jiang Hai said helplessly as he looked at the pile of cards in front of him. Why am I so unlucky today? Jiang Hai smacked his lips. He felt that he was a little too miserable. It was said that success in love and failure in gambling, and when one was especially unlucky, it actually represented success in some aspects. For example, at this time, Jiang Hai didn't know, in an apartment in Boston. Walter was looking at Farid Kirk in front of him with an ashen face. This damn guy, he took my money and didn't do anything for me. Although his face was even uglier at this time, it wasn't a reason for me to let him go. Mr. Walter, I really don't have a way. If there was a little way to mess with Jiang Hai and Winthrop, I would do it without hesitation, but I really don't have a way. Now, the whole state is waiting for him to pay the taxes next year. Under such circumstances, I can't touch him at all. Farid Kirk looked at the ashen Peter Walter in front of him and pleaded. He didn't know that Jiang Hai was so powerful. Mr. Kirk, I think you're mistaken about one thing. I'm not listening to your complaints. I just want results. Walter gently tapped the handle of the chair under his butt and said with a gloomy face, I really have no way. I can double your money back to you. If you want to sue me, then go ahead. But when the time comes, I will indeed be guilty of bribery, but you won't be able to escape responsibility. I heard that Mr. Walter is recently running for president of Celanese Company. If there is any bad news at this time, it will also be disadvantageous to Mr. Walter. Looking at Peter Walter in front of him, Faraday Kirk really had no other way. He gritted his teeth. In this case, he could only go all out. Since he threatened him, then he would threaten him back. Let's see who is more afraid of who. Oh, you're threatening me? Well, with a person like you, I guess we won't have a chance to meet in the future. Return the money we gave you 10 times over. If there's a penny less, I'll let you know the consequences. It won't be as simple as going to prison. Hearing that Faraday still dared to threaten him, Peter Walter's eyes narrowed. He subconsciously wanted to kill this guy directly, but considering that this guy lived in the wealthy area of Boston, and that he was not here to create a case, he took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. 10 times. Hearing Peter Walter's words, Faraday Kirk was in a dilemma. He had received a total of $10,000 from Faraday. 10 times was $2 million. He had only earned a total of $2 million over the years, and this was including the villa under his feet. If he had to pay back 10 times, then he would really be back to square one. But if he did not pay, he might really have to go to prison to reflect. And most importantly, Peter Walter did not give him a chance to refute. After he finished speaking, he had already stood up and left Faraday Kirk's house. Walking out of the wealthy area, he returned to the hotel he was staying in Boston. They had long left Winthrop because all the townspeople knew that it was because of these people that Augustine and the others embarked on the path of confrontation with Jiang Hai. They even punished Augustine, let alone the townspeople. Therefore, in addition to living in Jiang Hai's villa, they couldn't buy anything. From cigarettes and lighters to food and ingredients, they couldn't buy anything. The reason why Jiang Hai let them continue to live in his seaside villa was because he wanted to buy something. It was mainly because Azalina was monitoring them. But now, they had no choice but to move to Boston a few days ago. When Peter Walter returned to the hotel, he heard waves of angry shouts and curses coming from his room. At around 9 o'clock that night, a man with Peter Walter's group left the hotel. He went to the South District of Boston. At around 10 o'clock in the evening, he went from 1 person to 10 people. These people drove to the port of Boston. After renting a boat there, they went to Jiang Hai's manor by sea. Big brother, are we really going to cause trouble for Jiang Hai? At around 1 o'clock in the morning, they drove the boat to the outskirts of Jiang Hai's territory. One of the young men whispered to the middle-aged man beside him with some hesitation. What's wrong? Are you afraid? Hearing his words, the middle-aged man raised his eyebrows and said with some arrogance, I'm not afraid. Think about it. That's Jiang Hai. Even a guy like Billy fell in his hands. I heard that those people's entire families were killed. Hearing what the middle-aged man said, the young man said with some hesitation, there's no evidence to show that those people were done by Jiang Hai. It's very likely that Billy offended a lot of people in the past, so as soon as he fell, his family was killed by other gangs. Don't be suspicious. Hearing this, another young man said with a smile. It was obvious that he was not afraid at all. But, can we do it? I heard that the defense of Jiang Hai's house is quite terrifying. But what this person said didn't make the young man let down his guard. He said to the people around him with a hesitant expression, that's why we're taking the sea route this time. A frontal assault isn't our style. Hearing his words, the employer sitting at the front spoke. After that, he turned his head and looked at the people behind him. I'll reiterate the goal of tonight's battle. You can't kill or kidnap Jiang Hai, or people who have an important relationship with Jiang Hai. These 2 girls, one is called Daliana, and the other is called Marian. They are Jiang Hai's nominal daughters. Of course, I don't know if they are his mistresses, but their relationship should be closest to Jiang Hai. What we need to do is to kidnap the three of them, at least one of them, understand? Looking at the people in front of him, the employer said with a serious face. Hearing his words, everyone nodded. This was also the reason why they were willing to accept this order. It was just kidnapping, not killing. This was the best result. If they really killed the people on Jiang Hai's side, they would be in big trouble. Since you all understand, let's do it. The time was 3:20 in the morning. At this time, the boat was about half an hour away from Jiang Hai's dock. They could even vaguely see the lights on the dock, but they didn't plan to go to the dock. Instead, they turned directly and touched the forest in the distance. But at this moment, their boat suddenly shook. The propeller that was still moving in the water stopped at this time. The entire boat stopped quietly in the middle of the sea. What's going on? Looking at the motionless boat, the employer in front said anxiously, I don't know. The propeller won't turn. These damn profiteers, they actually gave us defective products. Hearing the employer's words, the person closest to the propeller couldn't help but curse secretly. Hearing his words, many people followed suit. Fix it quickly, we don't have much time. Looking at the time, it was already past 3:00 in the morning. They didn't have much time left. They had no chance to sneak attack again at dawn, so they must take advantage of this opportunity. Hearing this man's words, the people behind immediately responded and then prepared to pull the propeller out of the water. He did succeed. He successfully pulled the propeller out of the water. But when he pulled it out, his pupils unconsciously dilated. This was because at this time, there was a huge tentacle wrapped around his propeller. What the hell is this? Looking at the huge tentacle, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva as he muttered in a low voice. Tut 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 tut. But before he could figure out what was going on, under the sea, many tentacles broke through the water in an instant and entered their sight. Under their eyes, these tentacles instantly entangled the boat, and then there was a violent shaking, almost throwing them out. Not good, it's a big squid, hurry up and think of a way. Looking at the situation in front of them, most people were confused, but the leader of those people was not the employer, but the middle-aged man. He recognized what this terrifying thing was. But he knew that the squid with this kind of tentacle must not be small. He didn't understand at all. Didn't this thing live in the deep sea? How come Jiang Hai also has one here? Hearing his shout, no one moved, because the shaking was too violent. Who the hell is it? Go to hell. After all, this boat is not a particularly sturdy thing. Soon, the boat will be shaken apart by this guy. At this time, the crisis of survival also overcame fear. One person instantly pulled out the gun on his leg, picked it up directly, and shot one of the tentacles. In an instant, blue blood gushed out. But this bullet is nothing to this squid. Even for this tentacle, it's just a drop in the ocean. And this tentacle seemed to have found the direction in an instant. It let go of the boat and instantly rushed to the person who shot it. Without giving him time to react, the tentacle wrapped around this guy's body in an instant. The barbs on the tentacle were like daggers, directly piercing through this guy's clothes, and blood instantly flowed all over the tentacle and the cabin. Seeing their comrade being stabbed, many people unfastened their seatbelts, preparing to save their comrade. But unfortunately, the tentacle didn't give them a chance. It exerted force in an instant, pulling the chair the person was sitting on directly and dragging it into the sea together with it. After they heard a scream, there was no sound outside, only the boat was constantly shaking like a boat in a storm. It was about to fall apart. Seeing this, everyone looked at the middle-aged man and the employer. Abandon the boat. Gritting his teeth, the middle-aged man knew that although it was safe to stay on the boat, if the boat was broken, they would also be finished. After he and the employer looked at each other, he issued such an order. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, everyone stood up for the first time, unfastened their seatbelts, took some things they needed, and jumped into the sea. As soon as they entered the water, everyone swam to the other side like crazy, but they did not notice that it was really safe to enter the water. If they had night vision at this time, if they could see the situation under the sea at this time, they probably wouldn't say so. As these people swam desperately to the shore, some huge figures gradually appeared under them. With a flash of a black figure, the next second, A black figure instantly rushed up from under the water. It didn't give these people any chance or hope at all. It directly went from the bottom to the top, and in an instant, it bit a person's waist and rushed out of the water with an impact. Looking at the huge figure in front of them and their companion who was directly bitten in half in midair without even having time to scream, everyone was dumbfounded. They did not understand why this was happening. Chapter 632. Boom! With a loud bang, the giant beast fell into the sea again, but one of their companions was missing. Feeling the rain of blood around them, they were completely stunned. Their eyes were filled with despair. Swim quickly, swim quickly. If you don't want to become food, swim quickly. It was too dark and they couldn't see clearly what was rushing up, but it seemed to be a shark. The leader reacted the fastest and immediately called everyone to swim to the shore. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, these people reacted and immediately began to swim to the shore. However, they were still too slow. At this time, the other big fish also launched an attack. Although Big Fool's wife wasn't as big as Big Fool, she wasn't small either. She caught up with a person behind and instantly bit the person's flapping foot into her mouth. As this person kept screaming, everyone watched helplessly as he was dragged into the water by Big Fool's wife and never appeared again. This made these people even more terrified. It was said that human potential was unlimited. After 3 of their teammates died, the remaining 7 people might have never swum so fast in their lives. They swam desperately to the shore. However, the big fish weren't just Big Fool and Big Fool's wife. At this moment, a figure emerged from the sea. Although this figure was much smaller than the previous 2, it was equally deadly. It didn't give its target any chance at all. Its sharp beak instantly pressed against a person's back. Before this person was stabbed into the sea, he saw clearly what attacked him. It was a dolphin, but didn't they say that dolphins were humans' friends? Why would it attack him? In fact, he was thinking too much. Humans would hurt each other, let alone animals. If humans placed their hopes on the premise that animals wouldn't hurt them, it would be too sad. Swim quickly, swim quickly. Listening to the continuous screams in his ears, the leader had no other choice but to shout for them to swim quickly. The monsters under the sea were not something they could fight against. Other than swimming quickly, they were at a loss. Even if they had guns on them, against these monsters, what use were guns in the sea? Moreover, it was still night. This was a good time for them to launch a sneak attack. It was also a good time for these guys to launch a sneak attack. However, even if they used all their strength, they still lost people one by one. When the leader swam to the shore, only the employer was left. The 8 men he brought had all been buried in this sea. As soon as he came ashore, he didn't have time to celebrate the rest of his life. The first thing he did was to grab the guy's collar. It was all because of this guy that the 8 young men died here. Don't say those useless things. I'll raise the original price by 5 times. Now we have no chance to retreat. But before the leader could roar, the employer had already slapped his hand away. While gasping for breath, he said helplessly. He didn't know that Jianghai's sea would raise these monsters. Isn't he raising fish in the sea? How could he raise fish? The fish he raised were not enough for these guys to eat, okay? You bastard! Hearing his words, although the leader really wanted to beat him up, he was right. Now was not the time for internal strife. They had no way out. He threw him to the ground hard. He stood up again and observed the situation in front of him. At this time, because they were escaping for their lives, the place where they landed was the closest land to them. This was already the border of Jianghai's manor. The electrified iron wire was there. If they wanted to leave, they would have to go through the electric current. Otherwise, they would have to wade in the water. But now, they would not go into the water even if they were beaten to death. There were 2 ways to go to Jianghai's place. One was to walk along the beach, but this would be discovered by the people on night watch at the dock. The sound just now was so loud that the people on the dock had probably noticed it. The gains did not make up for the losses. Then there was only one other way left, which was to go through the forest in front of them without being noticed. The 2 looked at each other. Without saying much, they had already made up their minds. After taking a break, they looked at the time. Unknowingly, it was already 3:40 in the evening. There was not much time left before dawn. They had to speed up. They sorted out their equipment. Food, water, and so on. They had been abandoned on the ship just now. After all, the ship had been reduced to pieces and was pulled into the sea by the monster. At this time, they only had a pistol with 15 bullets in it and a tactical dagger. Although there were not many things, they had to try their luck. Holding the pistol, they walked into the forest together. When they were outside, there was still the moon and the stars in the sky. But when they walked into the forest, the moon and the stars disappeared. Because it snowed last night, the snow melted in the sun and froze at night, so the forest ground was not very good to walk on. It was very slippery. The pace of the two's advance was somewhat affected. While quietly sneaking into the forest, they were constantly looking around vigilantly. There were sea monsters in Zhonghai's waters. Who knows what kind of things are in this forest? In fact, they were right to be careful. Because just as they entered the forest, a pair of green eyes quietly opened. Then, a huge figure slowly walked out from the depths of the forest. The thick pads on its feet allowed it to step on the ground without making any sound. The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer. Finally, when the two of them reached the center of the forest, the three of them met. But unfortunately, the prey did not realize that it was being watched at this time. I say, the situation doesn't seem right. Why is it so quiet all of a sudden? Looking around, the employer couldn't help but stop for a moment and whisper to the leader beside him. After the leader heard his words, he also listened carefully. Damn, I was almost fooled by you. It's November now. Insects and other things have died long ago. The birds that should have left have all left. How can it not be quiet? But after listening for a long time, the leader who didn't hear anything couldn't help but curse at the employer and leave first. Hearing his words, the employer was also stunned for a moment. Yes, he seemed to be thinking too much, but just as he laughed self-deprecatingly and was about to say something, a sudden gust of wind blew. In the next second, he felt a huge force from behind, pushing him to the ground. Then he felt a sharp pain in the back of his head, and he couldn't feel anything else. After hearing this voice, the leader standing in front of him couldn't help but subconsciously widen his eyes and turn his head around. But when he looked back again, he didn't see the humanoid shadow, but only the shadow of a huge beast. At this time, the beast was lying on the employer's body, constantly gnawing on something. As if feeling his gaze, the beast also raised its head. Its pair of emotionless eyes stared at the person in front of it. Seeing its gaze, the leader here was already scared out of his wits. He had already forgotten that he still had a gun in his hand. The first thing he did was to run towards the depths of the forest. The beast followed behind him at a leisurely pace. After running for an unknown amount of time, the man ran into a pool in the forest. At this time, the giant beast also blocked him here. Looking at the giant beast in front of him and the pool behind him, the man was somewhat stunned. It's over, I'm dead. This thought kept washing the middle-aged man's heart. He was about to collapse. But at this moment he suddenly felt his hand tighten. He remembered that he still had a gun. Thinking of this, he directly picked up the gun and shot at the vague figure in front of him without saying a word. Bang! The gunshot startled the giant beast, but after all, it had night vision. When he raised the gun, it had already made a dodging action, so this shot only startled it and didn't hurt it. But with this thing, it was a lot more afraid. Seeing that the giant beast no longer moved forward, the middle-aged man here didn't continue to shoot. At this time, he only had 14 bullets left. He had to use them sparingly. Otherwise, even if he didn't die, he would have to spend his next life in prison, so he had to find a way to escape from here. Go away, get out of the way, get out of the way. Looking at the giant beast's slightly fearful eyes, well, he could only see its eyes. The middle-aged man kept shouting. It seemed that the giant beast really understood his words. After hearing what he said, it really slowly retreated until it disappeared into the forest. Watching the giant beast retreat, the middle-aged man sat on the ground powerlessly. He didn't expect that tonight would be so terrifying. He thought of many possibilities. His people and Jiang Hai's gunfight, his people's success, his people's failure, and even the police came to kill him. He thought of all these, but he didn't think that his people would fall into the hands of some animals. Whether it was animals in the sea or on land, it was too scary. This Jiang Hai, he is a madman. He is a pure madman. How can a normal person raise these things? Sitting on the ground powerlessly, he kept cursing, as if cursing Jiang Hai at this time would make his mood better. But he didn't notice that while he was angrily scolding Jiang Hai, something that looked like a piece of dead wood slowly floated out of the water behind him. The crocodile also had night vision, and its pair of eyes were emitting a faint green light. It slowly floated behind the guy who kept cursing its owner. In an instant, the giant crocodile shot out of the water. When the middle-aged man in front heard the movement behind him, he reacted immediately. He wanted to look back, but unfortunately he only saw a big bloody mouth. After the gun in his hand unconsciously fired a few bullets, the whole forest returned to a state of tranquility. The wind blew, carrying a fishy smell, but he didn't know if it was the smell of blood or the sea. "Boss, did you shoot last night?" 3 hours later, when Jiang Hai went for a run, he happened to pass by the dock, but he was stopped by Eleanor Cece, who was on duty last night. She looked at Jiang Hai with some doubts and asked, "Last night? I didn't?" Thinking back, he was the only one who slept at home last night. He didn't even fire the gun, let alone a real gun. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but look at Cece strangely. "That's really strange. I heard some gunshots last night, but after turning on the sonar, I didn't find anything. It's really strange." Hearing that it wasn't Jiang Hai, Eleanor Cece couldn't help but be a little puzzled. "It shouldn't be like this. Hey, it could also be from outside. I didn't receive an alarm here." Waving his hand, since there was nothing, Jiang Hai didn't care. Almost everyone in the United States has a gun, and it's not impossible for some gunshots to be heard at night. In the past, Jiang Hai had also encountered some people who drank too much. They would drive while shooting at the sky. When he first came here, he was woken up by these people. In his mind, it might have been the same thing last night. Is that so? Although there were still some doubts, nothing really happened. After hesitating for a moment, Eleanor Cece nodded to show that she understood because she had encountered what Jiang Hai said before. "By the way, how's the situation at the fish farm recently?" Looking at Eleanor Cece, who had accepted his explanation, Jiang Hai also smiled and asked him the question he was most concerned about. "This is a big question. Recently, the fish have grown very well, and the water temperature is higher than last year. It seems that we will have a bumper harvest next year." When it comes to fish, Eleanor Cece is much more excited. After all, these are his insurance. Jiang Hai is a magical person. Edward Anderson told them this before. After they saw the income of the cowboys, these fishermen were anxious, but at the same time, they were full of confidence in Jiang Hai. They believed that as long as they did well, their future income would not be much higher than that of the cowboys, just like the ordinary fishermen and cowboys, but at least they would not earn less than them. His heart itched at the thought of earning dozens or even millions of dollars a year. It seems that he has unknowingly entered the ranks of the high-income group. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but grin. With such a boss, what else could he ask for? Chapter 633. It's so boring. Sitting on the recliner that was moved into the house, Jiang Hai was playing with his phone and reading a novel. His eyes glanced at the sunny day outside, hesitating whether or not he should find something to do. Otherwise, it would be really boring. Winter in the north was like this. There was really nothing to do. If someone heard Jiang Hai say this, they would probably say, "Then you can go out and play in the snow, build a snowman, have a snowball fight, etc." If someone said this, Jiang Hai would probably spit out a mouthful of salt soda. Build a snowman and have a snowball fight? Was that something an adult should do? Wasn't it boring? Also, where did the snow come from? Where was the snow? It was only the beginning of November. This was only the beginning of winter. Sometimes, there would be some small snowflakes at night, but they were just small snowflakes without any feathers. They would melt by noon in the day. The beginning of winter could only be described with one word: cold. It was hard to get used to. In this kind of weather, even if Jiang Hai wanted to go out and play, he had nowhere to go. Recently, the young people in Winthrop were either going to school or staying at home. Who would be crazy enough to go out and suffer from the cold? Even if they wanted to go out and play, they would go to places like bars. But everyone knew that Jiang Hai did not go to bars. But now, he was really depressed. He was like an old man, lying on his jade recliner, looking at the sky and his phone from time to time. He had nothing to do. The time in the United States was the opposite of that in China. Especially in the East, there was a 13-hour time difference. When Jiang Hai woke up in the morning, it was already dark. When he was the most idle around noon, Huaxia was the time when she slept the best. He was also embarrassed to call his friends to go to the bathroom at this time, so he really had nothing to do. Actually, did Jiang Hai really have nothing to do? Actually, that was not the case. For example, there was a lot of work in the cowshed, but he felt that it was smelly, so he did not want to go. There were also a lot of zhuji by the sea, so he could go out to sea. He felt that it was cold, so he did not want to go. Therefore, when he stayed at home, he really did not have much to do. Winter in the north was like this. When there was no work, it was indeed quite boring. It was unlike spring, summer, and autumn when he could go out to play, but there was nothing to play with now. Jiang, do you eat tanghulu? Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about what he should do, Xiaoya ran up from downstairs in a pair of slippers. She was holding 2 candied haws in her hands. These candied haws were made by Jiang Hai last time. These days, Jiang Hai would put these candied haws into the freezer during the day and take them out to freeze at night. Therefore, the taste was quite good. After receiving a bunch of candied haws from Xiaoya, Jiang Hai ate happily. Speaking of which, these candied haws had been stored for a long time. The candied haws were sold around March to June every year. Jiang Hai's candied haws were left behind at that time. Although they were frozen and did not spoil, the taste was somewhat different. Next year, no matter what, I have to set up the greenhouse. I am not used to eating stale food. While eating the candied haws, Jiang Hai thought to himself. However, while he was thinking, he glanced at Xiaoya who was beside him. Then Jiang Hai sighed helplessly. Although it was winter, the weather outside was below 10 degrees, which was only a few degrees. However, the temperature in Jiang Hai's manor was very high. The geothermal heat in Jiang Hai's manor kept the temperature at 26 degrees. It was not particularly hot, but it was definitely not cold. Because of this, the women in Jiang Hai's villa were dressed very freely. Delina and Marian liked to wear pajamas with 2 layers of tulle. Although they did not wear anything inside, at least they had clothes and pants. Moreover, Jiang Hai did not have any bad intentions towards them, so these did not matter. And the most important thing was that when Jiang Hai told them, they would listen. This was the most important point. However, Bernice, Xiaoya, and Azalina were a bit excessive. Among them, Bernice liked to walk back and forth in the house every day. She did not wear a vest inside. As soon as she bent down, Jiang Hai could clearly see everything that should not be seen. Her lower body was a pair of athletic tight 3/4 pants, which tightened her thighs and buttocks. Azalina was more direct. She directly wore a short-sleeved t-shirt that looked like Jiang Hai's. Jiang Hai was very strong. He was more than 190 centimeters tall and weighed more than 260 kilograms. Of course, all of his muscles were very dense. Even so, his arms were still thick and his chest was big. He had to buy a 2-meter XXXL t-shirt. Azalina wore his shirt. One side of the collar was on her neck, while the other side could even completely expose her shoulders. Sometimes she would wear a pair of underpants. Sometimes she would wear nothing. She just walked in the house in such a cool manner. However, if someone knocked on the door, she would instantly return to the room. If she did not expose her shoulders, her ferocious cleavage would be exposed. Jiang Hai did not want to see it. Among these people, Xiaoya was considered relatively normal. However, she might have been led astray by them recently. For example, today, Xiaoya only wore a lace tulle nightgown. Although it was called a nightgown, it did not even cover her thighs. She did not wear anything on her upper body. After giving Jiang Hai the candied haws, She directly sat on the wooden recliner opposite Jiang Hai with her legs bare. Her clothes fell down, revealing her upper body. Jiang Hai could clearly see the 2 round lumps and some small things on them that could not be described. Looking down, he could clearly see the underpants with Winnie the Pooh printed on it. Jiang Hai was a little uneasy, especially those 2 long legs, which were white and tender, swaying back and forth in front of him. Those little toes, which looked like they were carved out of jade, were also mischievously moving to show off their owner. He was in a very good mood now. "Cough, I say, why don't you wear more when you go back?" Looking at Xiaoya's appearance, Jiang Hai could not help but feel a little depressed. "No, I feel that this is just right. If it's cold, I'll rub in your arms for a while." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya smiled and then said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai could not help but roll his eyes at her. "Where did you learn all these from? Don't always learn those useless things from your sister. If you have time, you should study your dishes more." Looking at Xiaoya, Jiang Hai looked at her unhappily and said to her, "Is there anything you want to eat recently? Tell me, I'll make it." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya could not help but raise her eyebrows, and then said with a serious face. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's attention also shifted from her body to food. Indeed, for people like Jiang Hai, eating might be the only existence that could compete with women. He felt that the next time, if he could not control himself, he would just think about eating. He did not know if it was reliable, but this was worth a try. Now that Xiaoya mentioned food, Jiang Hai also remembered. "Right, I want to eat soup dumplings. Can you make them?" Since Xiaoya's illness had been cured, Jiang Hai would occasionally get up in the morning to make some breakfast. Usually, lunch and dinner were taken care of by Xiaoya. Xiaoya was really talented in this area. In the past, she only knew how to make Chinese dishes. Now, because there was no pork or river fish, she made more Western dishes. She also combined a lot of Eastern and Western dishes, which made the taste even better. So usually, Jiang Hai did not have any requirements for food, but now that she mentioned it, he would just say it and see. "Soup dumplings? Is it from Su province?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Xiaoya also asked a little strangely. I don't know. I only know that it seems to be from Bao Qingtian's side." After hesitating, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. In fact, soup dumplings were a very ancient food in Huaxia. It had a history of more than 1,000 years. Legend has it that the earliest time was during the Northern Song dynasty. It was not a particularly noble dish. It was already sold on the streets and in the market. At that time, it was called soup dumplings or soup dumplings. The most famous place of origin was the state where fireworks occurred in March. During the Northern Song dynasty, Wang Lu, one of the 72 shops in Dongjing, Bianliang, produced and sold cave plum blossom dumplings. It was this kind of dumpling that was known as the best in Dongjing. After the Northern Song dynasty, soup dumplings were passed down in Kaifeng. It was not until the 1920s that it spread out from the first dessert shop. This kind of dumpling could be found in many places. The most famous one was Kaifeng, followed by Jiangnan, Shihang, Nandu, and so on. These were the places where these buns were produced. So now, everyone knew that these buns were mostly produced in Jiangnan, not the place where they were produced. So now Xiaoya asked if it was the one in Su province. Jiang Hai thought for a while, and it seemed that there was not much difference. Anyway, it is just soup dumplings. After hesitating for a while, Jiang Hai said to Xiaoya. He was also not sure where this kind of dumpling came from. But he was sure that it was not from Bing City, even though there was a restaurant in Bing City that sold delicious food. "Oh, I know. I will give it a try." I had always been doing red case, and had never done white case before. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, Xiaoya was also excited. She also wanted to give it a try. The red case and white case that Xiaoya mentioned was a term used by chefs. The red case was mainly used to stir-fry vegetables, and the white case was used to cook staple foods like desserts, rice, steamed buns, dumplings, etc. All staple foods were under the white case category. Other than that, there was also water case, which was to wash vegetables and do odd jobs. Nowadays, it was not called water case, But, odd jobs. After deciding to do it, Xiaoya finished the candied hawthorn in her hand and quickly ran downstairs to study it. It was not easy to make soup dumplings. The top, the broth, and the hardness of the noodles were all very particular. After about an hour, Xiaoya asked Jiang Hai to go downstairs to try. After Jiang Hai went downstairs, he saw a basket of dumplings on the table in the living room. This basket of dumplings did not look as authentic as the dumplings that Jiang Hai had eaten before, but it looked good. At this moment, Bernice, Azalina, Daliana, Marian, and Xiaoya were sitting around the table, looking at the basket of dumplings in front of them. They wanted to try but did not dare to. When they saw Jiang Hai coming down, they all looked at him. "Didn't you try it?" Looking at the basket of dumplings, it looked really good, so Jiang Hai asked them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the girls shook their heads and looked at Jiang Hai expectantly. What kind of filling? Looking at their appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help retreating a bit. But the smell of these buns was really quite good. He couldn't help it. After hesitating for a moment, he picked up one and asked Xiaoya. Fresh meat and shrimp. Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to try, Xiaoya could not help but say to him carefully. This was a very normal ingredient. Jiang Hai looked at the dumpling in front of him and hesitated for a moment, then gently bit into it and drank the soup inside. When the soup entered his mouth, besides being hot, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but brighten. He had to admit that the soup was very good. Xiaoya should have made the ingredients for the chicken soup, mixed with the fragrance of the meat and the sweetness of the shrimp. At least for this soup, Jiang Hai had to give it 10 points. In fact, it was also understandable. Not to mention the chicken soup, Jiang Hai's pork was the meat of the fragrant pig that he imported from the country. The shrimp were also Arctic sweet shrimp, all of them were fresh. Moreover, they grew up eating spirit chi plants, so it would be strange if the soup was not fresh. After drinking the soup, Jiang Hai threw the dumpling into his mouth. When he bit into it, he could feel the firmness of the meat, the taste of the chicken soup, and the texture of 2 shrimp stacked together. Jiang Hai's eyes suddenly narrowed. This taste was too good. Did you succeed? Xiaoya looked at Jiang Hai's appearance and couldn't help but ask worriedly. Success. When Jiang Hai heard Xiaoya's words, he directly picked up the steamer and ran upstairs. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice, Daliana, and Ma and also ran up. They had not eaten yet. Seeing Jiang Hai throw the dumplings into his mouth one by one, it would be strange if they were not anxious. Let them snatch it. I remember that you still have a lot of dumplings. Let's cook them. Looking at the 4 people fighting over the dumplings, Azalina walked to Xiaoya's side and looked at Xiaoya, who also wanted to try. She patted her shoulder and whispered. Hearing her words, Xiaoya smiled and nodded. She almost forgot that she still had dumplings, so the two slipped into the kitchen and started cooking again. At this time, a sports car also arrived in front of Jiang Hai's manor. Chapter 634. When the sports car stopped, a woman with a seductive figure got out of the car. This woman looked to be in her 20s. She was tall and had long hair. Her skin was very white, and she had sharp legs. Her eyes were slender and not small. She looked like a little fox, making people want to hold her in their arms and cherish her. She was wearing a mink coat, a black turtleneck sweater, a pair of patent leather pants, and a pair of tall boots. Standing there, she was the embodiment of purity and seduction. She was indeed very beautiful. However, at this moment, she looked a bit hesitant and tangled. Standing at the gate of Jiang Hai's manor, she hesitated for a long time but didn't press the doorbell. After hesitating for about 10 minutes, she pressed the doorbell, not knowing whether it was because she was frozen or because she had made up her mind. The last one is mine. At this moment, Jiang Hai, Bernice, Daliana, and Marian had already collapsed on the sofa. Daliana was riding on Jiang Hai's back, while Marian was hanging in Jiang Hai's arms and holding his arms tightly. Bernice didn't care whether she was exposed or not. She just put her arms around Jiang Hai's head and let his head lean against her chest. Her legs were also supporting one of Jiang Hai's arms. She didn't care about her vital parts at all. She directly grabbed the last steamed bun with both hands and threw it into her mouth. After that, she started to eat it happily. How could this be? Seeing the last steamed bun disappear, Daliana and Marian instantly lost their strength and collapsed on the sofa helplessly. Bernice was like a general who had won a battle as she smiled quite complacently. Elder sister, don't worry, there are enough steamed buns. However, at this moment, Xiaoya couldn't help but smile as she brought out more steamed buns. Looking at these steamed buns, Daliana and Marian, who were still a bit weak, immediately jumped up. Just now, they also grabbed one each. Of course, that was when Jiang Hai went easy on them. They had to admit that although the steamed buns made by Xiaoya were not as good in appearance, the taste was almost good, especially after using such good ingredients. Now that there were new steamed buns, they immediately sat at the dining table and prepared to eat. Jiang Hai also climbed up from the sofa. At this moment, Jiang Hai's doorbell rang. They looked at each other curiously. They didn't know who would come at this time. Jiang Hai walked to the door. After picking up the phone, he found a familiar face on the other side. To be honest, he had only met the owner of this face a few times, although their relationship was a bit, ahem. Jiang? That's great, it's really... Seeing Jiang Hai's face on the screen, the beauty on the other side immediately said excitedly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look back at Bernice and the others. He found that they were indeed looking at him. But the way they looked at Jiang Hai was a bit different. In Azalina's eyes, it was indifference. In Xiaoya's eyes, it was curiosity. As for Daliana and Marian, it was another. Why did they say another? As for Bernice's eyes, they were full of contempt. Why are there so many women looking for Jiang Hai? Ahem, Cheryl, come in quickly. Forcibly ignoring the gazes of the people behind him, Jiang Hai coughed and opened the door. Yes, the person who came was called Cheryl. Her full name was Cheryl Lee. Speaking of her, she was originally an additional character. During the fight between Jiang Hai and Prawalton, she was a victim who accidentally intruded. The relationship between them was a bit messy. Jiang Hai didn't expect that she would come to him alone. But since she came, Jiang Hai couldn't refuse her. After pressing the button to open the door was opened again. Then Cheryl got in the car and drove to Jiang Hai's parking lot. When she got out of the car, she saw Jiang Hai standing at the door, waiting for her. Jiang, this time you have to help Miss Pra no matter what. As soon as she saw Jiang Hai, Cheryl threw herself into Jiang Hai's arms and said worriedly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Miss Pra? Something happened to Prawalton? Let's go in first. Don't worry, take your time. Looking at Cheryl in front of him, Jiang Hai immediately pulled her into the room and said to her. But as soon as she entered the room, Cheryl couldn't help but stare. Because at this time, looking at the women in the room who were dressed very simply, she seemed to have misunderstood. She couldn't help but smile brightly, then looked at Jiang Hai. This is my friend, Cheryl Lee. These two are my daughters, Daliana and Marian. These three are also my friends, Bernice and Lilia. This is Azalina Vicabrio. Seeing that the atmosphere in front of him was a bit cold, Jiang Hai introduced them. But although they introduced each other, there was still some awkwardness. Let's eat first, we can talk about it later. Seeing that the atmosphere was a bit awkward, Jiang Hai took the initiative to resolve the situation. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl didn't say anything. She took off her coat and ate a silent lunch with Jiang Hai and the others. Although there was no sound, everyone ate a lot. It was because these soup dumplings were really delicious. The 7 of them ate a total of 16 steamers. After eating all of Little Ya's soup dumplings, they were satisfied. After drinking some of Jiang Hai's tea, Jiang Hai took Cheryl Lee to the study on the 2nd floor. Cough. Although Jiang Hai didn't like reading, he still had a study. This was also a standard. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a place for people to discuss business. After entering the study with Cheryl Lee, Jiang Hai looked at her. What did she mean when she said that she wanted to help Prawalton? Looking at Jiang Hai's gaze, Cheryl Lee temporarily forgot about the delicious soup dumplings and turned around. "Jiang, you must help Miss Prawalton." When she mentioned Prawalton, she was a little excited. "Slow down, what's going on?" The story between Jiang Hai and Prawalton was a bit speechless. The relationship between him and Prawalton wasn't purely that of a boyfriend and girlfriend. However, some things did happen between them that shouldn't have happened. But more importantly, Prawalton and him were business partners. Whether it was the former or the latter, Jiang Hai couldn't be a heartless man. If he could help, he would definitely help. "It's like this." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl seemed to have found a group. After organizing her words, she said to Jiang Hai, "The reason was the Walton family. The origin of the Walton family was Sam Walton. He was the one who founded the Walmart department store. After his death, his eldest son originally owned the most shares. Roberson Walton, this man was Prawalton's biological father. This little old man had a good sense of business, but he was actually a very perverted guy. He had a total of 5 children, plus 3 illegitimate children. Prawalton was one of them. However, because her mother died early, she grew up in the Walton family when she was young. Before she grew up to the present, her status was not very secure, and she didn't have a good time in the family. Fortunately, she showed her talent in business, and now she had a firm foothold. The reason for this turmoil came from Prawalton's uncle, Jim Walton. He was the youngest son of Sam Walton, and he was also a genius. Although he didn't inherit his father's most shares, he was ranked 10th on the world's rich list last year, and Prawalton's father, Roberson Walton, was ranked 17th. The world's #1 family had 2 business geniuses. If one of them didn't compromise, it was bound to become like fire and water. In the past, the position of chairman was always controlled by Roberson, but the position of CEO was controlled by Jim Walton. However, 2 years ago, Roberson took advantage of Jim Walton's weakness, which was the CNN insulting incident. With this excuse, Roberson kept his shares, but kicked him out of the company and let Dong Mingluan, a foreigner, take over the position of CEO, and let his most talented daughter, Prawalton, take over Sam's Club. Roberson thought that this was stable, but he didn't expect that this winter, Jim Walton made a comeback. He persuaded most of the shareholders to return to the company. Sam's Club was the first thing he wanted to take back. Originally, Pulla Walton and his father were not in a hurry because they were still in control of the company. But at this time, there was news that Dong Mingluan was actually one of Jim Walton's people. This time, they were much more passive. Roberson Walton looked for Dong Mingluan and discussed with him about keeping Sam's Club. However, Dong Mingluan suggested that he join Roberson's camp. He was willing to do so, but he had one condition, and that was to marry Prawalton. After hearing this news, the whole Walton family, including Roberson, was speechless. Prawalton was naturally unwilling, but the family's decision was not up to her. These days, she had a hard time. She had to maintain Sam's Club, and at the same time, she had to deal with Dong Mingluan's love and the family's pressure. Looking at her, Cheryl and the others wanted to inform Jiang Hai at the very beginning. But Prawalton did not let them do so, but there was no use in delaying time. According to Cheryl, the Walton family would hold a banquet in New York the day after tomorrow, and Dong Mingluan would give the Walton family the last time at this banquet. At that time, he would propose to Prawalton on the spot. If she agreed, then it would be fine, but if she didn't, then he would completely lean towards Jim Walton's side. At that time, Sam's Club would still be lost, but Prawalton had to attend this family banquet. She went to attend this morning, but maybe because he was afraid that Cheryl and the others would cause trouble, after Prawalton left, Roberson Walton immediately sent people to seal her manor, and only people were allowed to enter, but not leave. Fortunately, Cheryl returned to China a few days ago and just came back today, otherwise, she would not have come out to find Jiang Hai. Such a big thing happened, why didn't you call me? Hearing what Cheryl said, Jiang Hai frowned. His woman, well, Jiang Hai's situation may be a bit special, but after all, she is a woman who had sex with him. And Jiang Hai also knows that she actually likes women. Letting her marry another man with such grievances, Jiang Hai will not agree. We don't have your phone number. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl shrugged helplessly and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned. It seems that I really didn't give them my phone number. You should have come to see me earlier. Which day are they holding the banquet? Looking at Cheryl in front of him, Jiang Hai let out a sigh and said affirmatively, but he was actually a little lacking in confidence. Looking up at Cheryl, Jiang Hai asked her. November 6th, which is the day after tomorrow. Looking at Jiang Hai, Cheryl said seriously. I have to think of a way to sneak in. Touching his chin, Jiang Hai muttered in a low voice. This is a troublesome matter. Needless to say, the security of the world's largest company's family banquet is definitely not weak. Although Jiang Hai has 4 times the physical fitness of an ordinary person, it is impossible for him to break in. But how to sneak in is also a problem. You don't have to sneak in. You have an invitation. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl couldn't help but stare for a moment. Then, she took out a magnetic card from her handbag. That was the invitation card. When she handed it over, someone would naturally come to verify Jiang Hai's information. I still have an invitation? Looking at the magnetic card handed over, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Aren't those people guarding against me? Yes, although this banquet is a Walmart family banquet, those who have important cooperative relationships with the Walton Company will also be invited. Last year, you helped the Sam's Club of Walmart earn hundreds of millions of dollars. You are naturally an important partner. Your name is on the 3rd table in the 1st row. It is very close to the front. If this didn't happen, this card should have been sent last month. Listening to Cheryl's words in front of him, Jiang Hai was speechless. I also have this kind of treatment? In fact, Jiang Hai is too low-key. In fact, as long as he is high-profile, he can go to any banquet near Boston or New York. No one will refuse a person with billions of dollars, no one. Chapter 635. What's wrong? Can't sleep? Looking at Cheryl Lee sitting on the balcony, Jiang Hai walked over with 2 bottles of water. After handing her a bottle, he asked while sitting opposite her. Today, Cheryl stayed in Jiang Hai's manor. However, she didn't stay in Jiang Hai's room. After all, it wasn't very good. Moreover, the two weren't very familiar with each other. Without Pra Walton in the middle, their relationship wasn't very close. Therefore, she stayed in the guest room. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Jiang Hai was a little thirsty after sleeping, so he got up to look for water to drink. But unfortunately, he drank all the water in his room. Therefore, he went downstairs to get 2 bottles of water. When he came back, he saw Cheryl sitting on the balcony on the 2nd floor, looking at the moon outside. Jiang Hai's balcony was semi-enclosed. The entire balcony was made of glass. But in summer, the glass could be raised and turned into an open-air balcony. In winter, the glass could be lowered, but it wouldn't affect the view outside. Therefore, in winter, Jiang Hai liked to sit here and look outside. At night, he could also sit here and look at the stars. I can't sleep sometimes. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee took the bottle of water handed over by Jiang Hai. She forced a smile, opened the bottle, took a sip, and then looked outside in a daze. Actually, you don't have to worry too much. Just trust me. Looking at her appearance, it was obvious that she was worried about Pra Walton. But with Jiang Hai here, he wouldn't let anything happen to Pra Walton. Well, I trust you very much. We all trust you very much. However, it's still necessary to be worried. It's just like when your family members undergo a minor surgery. Although you know that the success rate of this surgery is very high, it's still your family members. It would be strange if you don't worry. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl pursed her lips and said seriously. But trusting Jiang Hai and not worrying were 2 different things. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled. It was a good thing that Pra Walton had these girlfriends. Don't worry and stay here. I promise to bring Pra Walton back to you in one piece. After standing up, Jiang Hai patted Cheryl's shoulder and said earnestly. He had already talked to Cheryl about this matter. This time, only Jiang Hai would go to the banquet. Cheryl would stay in the manor. If they couldn't come to an agreement, Jiang Hai might run away with Pra Walton. But if Cheryl were to join them, it would be difficult. I understand. You should go to sleep. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl looked at Jiang Hai gratefully. Jiang Hai would go to New York tomorrow. She had to think about Jiang Hai. After looking at Cheryl Lee, Jiang Hai waved his hand and walked into his room. He didn't know when Cheryl fell asleep. The next morning, when he went to have breakfast, she wasn't there. When Jiang Hai was having breakfast, he told Delina and Marian about this matter. Delina and Marian had an impression of Prawalton. She was a strange big sister, but she gave them a lot of things. As for Bernice, Littleya, and Azalina, they didn't know who she was. But since she was Jiang Hai's receiver, it was necessary for Jiang Hai to help. Therefore, after having breakfast, Jiang Hai drove his battle shield and left. He went straight to the Hilton Hotel in New York. Because tomorrow was the Walton family's gathering time, in order to entertain these people who came from all over the country, it was impossible for everyone to come at the same time. There were always some who came early. Therefore, the Walton family had already booked rooms for these people in the hotel according to their specifications. According to the Walton family's information, Jiang Hai was 27 years old this year and had a net worth of about $2 billion. Last year, he brought $137,618,290 in pre-tax profits to Sam's Club in Walmart. Although he was not the top VIP partner, he was still a top VIP partner. After Jiang Hai showed his driver's license and the invitation card, he received a key to a suite. He got the key to a top-class suite. Although it was not a presidential suite, it was still a top-class suite. There were 3 rooms in the suite: a small room, a large living room, a study, and a master bedroom. Of course, generally, people like Jiang Hai would definitely bring bodyguards with them. The small room was for the bodyguards to live in. However, because Jiang Hai's purpose here was not so simple, he did not bring Azalina with him. After entering the suite, Jiang Hai looked around. He liked this place very much. The window of the master bedroom was a one-sided window. You could see outside from the inside, but you couldn't see inside from the outside. However, the transparency was quite good, just like ordinary glass. No matter what he did, it would be much more comfortable. After a simple rest in the room, Jiang Hai went downstairs to the buffet restaurant for lunch. After lunch, he went to Fifth Avenue. He wanted to buy a set of clothes there. Jiang Hai was used to being undisciplined. In the past, when he went to parties, banquets, and so on, he would wear his expensive outdoor sportswear. His set of clothes was actually not cheaper than a suit, but it did not look classy. But every time, it was someone else who invited him, so no matter what he wore, the other party had to endure it. Fortunately, he didn't often attend these events, but tonight was different. If he had only been invited to the banquet, he would probably still wear this. Today, he was leaving with Prawalton, so no matter what, he had to wear something more formal. So, he was prepared to buy a suit. Jiang Hai had worn a suit twice in his life. The first time was when he got married. He used the remaining 3,000 renminbi after his mother finished her business and bought a suit. But he only wore it once. After the wedding, it was hanging in his and Chi Li's new home. But when he left, he purposely took this suit with him. Now, it was hanging in his house in Bing City. He definitely did not want to wear it again. There was another suit, which Chi Li had bought for him during Chinese New Year last year. He only wore it once and hung it in his house in Bing City. Other than that, he did not have any other suits. The suit he was wearing today was probably the same. Originally, Jiang Hai wanted to buy a suit that cost about $1,000. But after calling Moses Adams, he advised him to buy a better suit. First, it was because Jiang Hai was not short of money. Second, Jiang Hai was considered a respectable person now. It was reasonable for him to have a suit in his house. He could not just buy a suit everywhere he went in the future. Also, it was too cheap to wear a suit that cost $1,000 to attend the Walton family's banquet. So, Jiang Hai was persuaded by Moses Adams to go to a custom-made suit shop on Fifth Avenue. When he walked in, an old man looked at Jiang Hai. He hesitated for a while and stood up. "Sir, what can I do for you?" Looking at Jiang Hai, the old man looked at him curiously. I'm going to buy a suit." Hearing what the old man said, Jiang Hai asked embarrassedly, "Oh, are you going to order it, or have you already ordered it?" Hearing that Jiang Hai was here to buy a suit, the old man couldn't help but ask curiously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai scratched his head. Do I have to order this thing? I haven't ordered it. I want to buy a set directly. I don't know if you have it here. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man froze for a moment, then laughed, then smiled at Jiang Hai and shook his head gently. Sir, we don't sell finished suits here. We only order suits here. I don't know why you came here, but I don't advise you to buy our clothes because, to be honest, our clothes are a bit too expensive. Looking at Jiang Hai, the old man chuckled, then shrugged and said, Oh, how expensive. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's interest was piqued. Moses Adams recommended him to come to this shop. There must be a reason for it to be expensive. But the old man himself said that it was ridiculously expensive. This made Jiang Hai a little confused. As he walked towards the old man. The old man also opened the sample album in front of him. Sure enough, after glancing at the prices on the sample, Jiang Hai's heart jumped twice for no reason. It was because the suits were indeed ridiculously expensive. Almost all of them cost $80,000 to $90,000, and they were only the cheapest ones. Some cost more than $100,000, and some even cost $200,000. Damn it, were these even suits? This is robbery. It's very expensive. To be honest, there aren't many people who come here to order suits all year round, but we can make a lot of money. The old man saw Jiang Hai's expression and said with a smile. In fact, what Jiang Hai didn't know was that this Alexander Amos custom-made suit shop was the most expensive custom-made suit shop in the world. Except for the suits made with special diamonds, this shop was the most expensive among the normal shops. The expensive men's suits were purely handmade, such as Amos, Armani, and the like. In the top society, these suits weren't ranked. Generally, when one went to a top party, these suits wouldn't appear. The ones that appeared more often, such as the Booker Brothers, Zegna suits, Brioni, Kaiv, these suits were the suits worn by the real rich. Armani, Amos, those were the full nouveau riche. And this Alexander Amos was the top brand of custom-made suits. After hearing the old man's explanation, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed, but he was still a little embarrassed to leave. Money is not a problem, but I have to wear it when I go to the party tomorrow night, so it's a little troublesome. Looking at the old man, Jiang Hai hesitated and said this. His original meaning was that if he couldn't rush it out tomorrow, then he didn't want it, but there weren't many people in the United States who understood the meaning of his words. In their ears, Jiang Hai was saying that he liked these suits very much, but he had to rush to wear them tomorrow and asked if he could make them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the old man here couldn't help but be a little surprised. He didn't expect Jiang Hai to be so straightforward. If I have to wear it tomorrow, I'll be greedy tonight. I'll get someone to come over and help. I'll definitely make the suit before noon tomorrow. You can come over and try it on at noon tomorrow. If it doesn't fit, you can change it in the afternoon. If you're sure you want it, then choose a version and material. Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai cursed in his heart. Fine, this time he must buy it. But just as Moses Adams said, he really should have a good suit. Then he looked carefully. The material of the suit here was mainly a mixture of wool, cashmere, and silk. It was warm, light, smooth, and had some flexibility. At least, it wouldn't break when he raised his arm. The price was different because of the strength of the mixture. The starting price of pure wool was $70,000, and the starting price of those with more cashmere was $90,000. Jiang Hai touched these materials and finally chose the material with more cashmere, which was the starting price of $90,000. When choosing the edition, Jiang Hai was a little confused, because the suit was also divided into editions. It was reasonable to say that it was divided into 3 types. One was a casual suit, the second was a formal suit, and the third was a business suit. But in Jiang Hai's opinion, it was actually a matter of how many buttons there were. A casual suit has 1 button, a formal suit has 2 buttons, and a business suit has 3 buttons. That's all. He wasn't a person who liked to wear buttons, so he asked the old man what he should wear to attend a top banquet. The old man told Jiang Hai that as long as it was a suit, the rest didn't matter. Very few people would pay attention to these. After all, there were many rich people who buttoned up their suits. Who would care about how many buttons the suit had? After hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai made a casual suit. After paying $10,000 as a deposit, Jiang Hai left. The old man also called some tailors to help. All the suits in this shop were handmade, and each suit required 16,000 needles. It would be impossible for one person to make it without a month or two. But Jiang Hai wanted it tomorrow, so they saved time and hired more people to make it. At noon the next day, Jiang Hai received a call. The preliminary design was done. Jiang Hai went to the shop and tried it on. It was indeed a handmade suit. It was very comfortable to wear, but in the old man's eyes, it was still somewhat lacking. While the old man helped Jiang Hai make it more suitable, Jiang Hai also went to buy some matching items. The old man gave Jiang Hai a shirt, but the tie, belt, and leather shoes had to be bought by Jiang Hai himself. Since the suit cost $92,300, Jiang Hai didn't need to save on the tie and other things. The leather shoes he bought were from Lang Fanza. You probably haven't heard of it, right? In fact, Jiang Hai hadn't heard of it either. But this was the most expensive shop on Fifth Avenue. It was said that they had the best leather shoes in the world. They were made of crocodile leather, which was not as comfortable as outdoor shoes. The belt and tie he bought were all from the Donkey brand. Once he wore them, the aura of a nouveau riche was quite heavy. After shopping, he returned to the suit shop. Jiang Hai tried it on again. He had to admit that after the modification, it was indeed more comfortable to wear than before. Coupled with Jiang Hai's belt, leather shoes, white and blue striped shirt, and tie, it was indeed quite intimidating. Especially the inverted triangle Jiang Hai wore, it really looked a little handsome. The male hormones in this suit were indeed more obvious than outdoor clothes, but Jiang Hai still didn't like to wear it. After paying the full amount, Jiang Hai took the car directly back to the hotel. On the way back, there was a traffic jam for a while. When he arrived at the hotel, a lot of people had already arrived. There was only about half an hour left before the banquet started. After Jiang Hai parked the car, he went directly to the venue. After all, it was the gathering of the world's largest family. The security here was quite strict, as Jiang Hai thought. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was a guard every 3 steps and a guard every 5 steps. After Jiang Hai went upstairs, he showed his invitation card. After confirming his identity, a waiter led him into the main banquet hall. At this time, there were already a lot of people in the main banquet hall. Jiang Hai looked around. There were almost 200 or 300 people. About half of them were men, and the other half were women. Many of them were young women. These people's clothes were gorgeous and simple. They were holding wine glasses, and their eyes were shining as they walked around the hall. For these women, Jiang Hai had heard of them before. These women should be the legendary socialites. To be able to enter this party hall, they estimated that they had paid a big price. Now they were looking for their prey. When Jiang Hai entered the room, these women's gazes swept over him. A suit that cost more than $90,000, a tie that cost more than $10,000, a belt that cost more than $20,000, a pair of leather shoes that cost more than $30,000, and a Patek Philippe watch that cost at least hundreds of thousands of dollars. Luke was definitely going to marry a real rich man. Although his face was a little unfamiliar, it didn't matter. As long as he was rich, they were interested in getting to know him. Just as these women were about to come out, Jiang Hai, who had been looking around after entering the room, also saw a figure he was looking for in the crowd. He immediately grinned and rushed over. Chapter 636. In the middle of the banquet, Pralton was wearing a black lace evening dress. She was standing proudly in the middle of the venue, holding a glass of martini in her hand, but her eyes were not focused. Looking at her, many young talents who wanted to come up and say hello couldn't help but stop. In this circle, who doesn't know that Pralton has a strange temper? Pralton, congratulations. But sometimes, there will be some exceptions. For example, at this time, a middle-aged man with brown hair, came over with a smile on his face and looked at Pralton and said with a smile, "Uncle Jim?" Looking at the man who came over, Prawalton frowned and said with disgust. Your expression is not a very friendly expression. I have heard about your matter. After today, you will be Dong Mingluan's person. I have to admit that your family's move is really beautiful, but do you think you can keep Sam's club like this? Looking at Prawalton's face, Jim Walton chuckled, then walked to her and whispered softly. Hearing his words, Prawalton's face became more ugly. This is our family's matter. I think Uncle Jim has no need and power to intervene. Looking at Jim Walton, Prawalton took a deep breath and said with a serious face. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jim Walton just smiled with a trace of disdain. How can he let go of what he wants so easily? Prawalton, you are here. But just as he was about to fight back, a voice suddenly came from behind him. Then he looked back and found a tall yellow man standing behind him, looking at the smile on his face. It was not difficult to see that this guy should know Prawalton, but he had no impression of this person. Looking at Prawalton, he found that she was completely stunned at this time. Her face was full of disbelief. Hello, young man, are you Prawalton's friend? Looking at the shock on Prawalton's face, it means that Prawalton knows who he is, but she didn't think that he would come, and he can't sneak in like this, so he may be someone who knows Prawalton. Jim Walton is on the Forbes list this year, 10th in the world. Of course, he is not a fool. With a turn of his eyes, he probably knew the identity of Jiang Hai, so he smiled and said to Jiang Hai, Yes, I am Prawalton's friend, and you are. Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Jiang Hai also looked at him. Of course. I am Prawalton's Jim. Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man took the initiative to stretch out his hand. After Jiang Hai heard his words, he was also stunned. This is Jim Walton, the world's 10th richest businessman with a total asset of more than $30 billion? He looks like an ordinary little old man, but as the saying goes, a slap does not hit a smiling face. Although he knows that this little old man is the ultimate villain, he still stretched out his hand and shook his hand. Then you young people talk, I will go see the others first. Seeing that Jiang Hai's hand had left his, Jim Walton smiled and left the place, walking into the distance. After Jim left, Prawalton stepped forward in an instant and took Jiang Hai's hand. She was a little excited at this time. Why are you here? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton took a deep breath, suppressed the thoughts in her heart, and then asked Jiang Hai in a low voice. Before this, she had been very conflicted. When she thought of marrying someone else, especially a man, she felt as disgusted as a dead mouse. Today, she was ready. Even if she had to hand over the rights of Sam's club, she would never marry Dong Mingluan. But at this time, Jiang Hai unexpectedly appeared. This made this woman, who was originally very nervous, suddenly have a trace of backbone. But then she thought about it. With Jiang Hai's strength, how could he move these people? But with Jiang Hai by her side, it was much better than fighting alone. Seeing the look in her eyes, Jiang Hai smiled and stretched out his hand, gently touched her head, and then pulled her into his arms. Prawalton felt Jiang Hai's action at first. At first, she was stunned, then she calmed down and quietly leaned on Jiang Hai's shoulder. Her hands also stretched out. Just like that, she wrapped them around Jiang Hai's waist. However, what he didn't know was that this scene had caused everyone's eyeglasses to shatter. Almost everyone's eyes and the corners of their eyes looked at Jiang Hai and Prawalton, with a trace of shock on their faces. Who is Prawalton? The little princess of the Walton family usually showed the coldest face to people. In the face of the pursuit of excellent men, she was disdainful. But what the hell is going on today? Maybe it's really a ghost. Would she also lean on a man's body like a little bird? No matter whether others believed it or not, they wouldn't believe it anyway. But at this time, this scene was in front of them, and they couldn't not believe it. Now they felt that their hearts, livers, glasses, and internal organs were almost broken. At the same time, some people who were still jealous of Dong Mingluan's possibility of winning the beauty's heart were secretly happy at this time. They seemed to see a green forest growing on Dong Mingluan's head. Don't worry, I will solve your problem. But at this time, Jiang Hai and Prawalton, who were hugging each other, didn't know what the people were thinking. Lifting Prawalton's face, Jiang Hai gently kissed her cheek and said in her ear. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton nodded seriously. Americans were better at expressing their thoughts. Now, even if Jiang Hai kissed her lips, she might not be shy, let alone just kissing her face. But with Jiang Hai's support, she was more confident that she could compete with the Walton family. "What are you doing? Let go." At this time, suddenly, a voice shouted. As the voice came, Jiang Hai and Pralton also looked in the distance, only to see that behind the crowd, two people were slowly walking over. The middle-aged man walking in front looked to be in his 30s or 40s. He was a white fat man, and at this time, his face was full of anger. Behind the fat man, there was a white old man with a sense of indecency. His white hair was combed disrespectfully, and he wore a pair of brown glasses on his face. When he saw Jiang Hai and Pralton, he was surprised, but he didn't care and slowly walked over. Seeing the two people coming over, the people who were watching the fun made a circle. Some people envied Jiang Hai for being able to break the thorny rose, but they were secretly amused. They knew that this time, there was a good show to watch, and the most likely thing was that Jiang Hai was finished. "You bastard, who are you? What are you doing here? Where is the security? How can you let such a person in?" After walking in front of Jiang Hai, the man shouted loudly as if he had gone crazy. For him, Jiang Hai was slapping his face today. Today was the Walton family's gathering, and also the day when he might marry Pralton. Why did this guy, Jiang Hai, suddenly appear, hugging his fiancée in front of him? F***ck, this villain's sense of déjà vu is too strong. "Me? Of course, I was invited by you. My name is Jiang Hai, the owner of the Soaring Dragon Manor, but who are you?" Hearing the fat man's words, the security guard hesitated for a moment, but still walked over. Although today was the Walton family's gathering, and Dong Mingluan had no right to ask the security guard to drive people away, after all, he would soon be the son-in-law of the Walton family, and at the same time, the current president. It was inevitable to give him some face. Looking at the security guard who was walking over, Jiang Hai chuckled. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, many people's eyes, which were originally looking forward to a good show, suddenly changed at this time. They might not know Jiang Hai's name, but it was not an exaggeration to say that the Soaring Dragon Manor was well known in the top social circles of the United States. After all, he almost monopolized the sales of the best beef. Many people had approached Jiang Hai, wanting to cooperate with him in the beef project, but they had no way to do so. Jiang Hai would not attend these banquets. This was the third time. The first time, he was not famous, and he only met Pralton. The second time, he was in China. Today was the third time. These people had no way to contact Jiang Hai. Now that Jiang Hai suddenly appeared, and it seemed that he had a close relationship with Pralton, they could not help but think. Soaring Dragon Manor. Since you are a guest here, please abide by some rules. After hearing Jiang Hai's self-introduction, Dong Mingluan hesitated. He was the current president of the Walmart Group. It was reasonable to say that Sam's Club was also a part of the Walmart Group. Although he could not intervene, he knew about the income of Sam's Club. Jiang Hai's beef had helped Sam's Club earn more than $130 million this year. Of course, this was only the direct profit. In addition to this direct profit, there were many other ancillary profits. For example, if one went to the supermarket to buy beef, it was impossible for ordinary people to just buy beef. They would definitely buy some other things. This was called the ancillary sales fee. Jiang Hai's beef had been in the market for a year. Oh no, in fact, only half a year. After half a year of fermentation, it had formed a reputation and brand effect in the upper class of the United States. Jiang Hai's beef was sold here, which was equivalent to a living advertisement. According to this year's calculation, the income of Sam's Club's staff related to the beef was about $300 million. $300 million was pure profit. Those directors and the like could not ignore it. After all, Dong Mingluan was only a senior worker, although he had some power now. But his power was given by the board of directors. He had to make money for these people. Therefore, he could not afford to offend the owner of Soaring Dragon Manor. Although he felt that his head was emitting green light, he could not bear it. His eyes were burning with anger as he said to Jiang Hai, "Unruly? I don't feel that there is anything unruly. Prawalton is my girlfriend. There is nothing wrong with me hugging my girlfriend. But after listening to Dong Mingluan's words, Jiang Hai domineeringly hugged Prawalton, then raised his head and said to Dong Mingluan with an arrogant face. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the people present could not help but burst into an uproar. Are you here to make trouble? Looking at Jiang Hai, Dong Mingluan narrowed his eyes and said with a face full of anger. You can think whatever you want, but I heard that you are ganging up to bully my girlfriend, so I came here mainly to say one thing. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai raised his hand and said with a serious face. My beef is sold to Prawalton. If Sam's Club is not under the control of Prawalton, then I will not sell to you. We have not signed a long-term supply contract. My beef is very popular. Before this, I just refused the opportunity to provide beef to the Dubai royal family. But I think as long as I am willing, this transaction can be established at any time. In other words, it is now a seller's market. Looking at the people in front of him, Jiang Hai did not know who they were, but it did not hinder Jiang Hai from saying these words. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, everyone present took a deep breath. He dared to threaten the Walton family? This Jiang Hai was really a calf who was not afraid of tigers. Now, it was up to the Walton family to accept Jiang Hai's words. However, if the Walton family really fell out with Jiang Hai, then would they have the opportunity to cooperate with Jiang Hai's soaring dragon manor? As for the Dubai royal family that Jiang Hai mentioned, didn't he already refuse? In this matter, whoever came first would get it first. No one would complain about money. They had also tested Jiang Hai's beef before, and it could not be imitated. Then, this seller's market would be very stable. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the audience was silent at this moment. Everyone looked at the Walton family and Dong Mingluan. The final decision of this matter depended on them. As for Prawalton at this time, she had completely lost the strong woman she used to be. She just hugged Jiang Hai's waist and lowered her head. She had never felt as safe as she did today. She knew that Jiang Hai's chips were not light. She also knew that she and Jiang Hai might not be able to reach the end, but what did it matter? With Jiang Hai by her side, she suddenly felt that her experience with Jiang Hai might not be so bad. Chapter 637. Mr. Jiang, our company's personnel transfer should have nothing to do with you. Dong Mingluan's face was so ugly that it made people's hair stand on end. But at this time he had to stand up. His goal was very clear. If Jim Walton's goal was the company, and Sam's Club was the first step, then he knew that it was impossible for him to get the company. But if he could marry Prawalton, it would be equivalent to Sam's Club being under his control. In that case, he would be the son-in-law of the Walton family and control Sam's Club. His position in the business world would be unshakable. He was ready to take both the money and the woman. And such an open scheme made people unable to do anything. No matter how talented and capable Prawalton was, she was just a woman, an illegitimate daughter. In order to keep the power in his hands, Prawalton's father would not let Sam's Club fall into the hands of her brother. So, it was necessary to agree to his proposal. But Jiang Hai, who had suddenly appeared, had messed up his plans. It seemed that he couldn't control his lust now. Although he had long regarded Pulla Walton, this iceberg royal sister, as his possession, he did not care about her. But now, Jiang Hai's actions made it clear to outsiders that his head wasn't just an ordinary green. And if what Jiang Hai said was true, his efforts would be in vain. If Jiang Hai really refused to cooperate with the Walmart Group, then Jim Walton would not provoke Jiang Hai even if he did not want Sam's Club. Because Jim Walton was first and foremost a businessman, and second, he was the youngest son who wanted to seize the family property. If the Walmart Group he took over was full of holes, he would not be happy. And most importantly, the directors of the Walmart Group would not let the wealth that Jiang Hai brought to them disappear just like that. Yes, the personnel transfer of the Walmart Group has nothing to do with me, but my beef has something to do with me. If Prawalton did not control Sam's Club, I would not sell it to you. Looking at Dong Mingluan in front of him, Jiang Hai glanced at Prawalton beside him. Jiang Hai had no right to their family matters, and he did not want to interfere. but he would protect Pra Walton's interests. Hearing Jiang Hai's tough retort, Dong Mingluan could not help but be speechless for a while. He would not shout, "Do you think you are the only one with beef in the world?" He was very clear that Jiang Hai's beef was indeed unique in the world. Although he doesn't know why, but it's true that only Jiang Hai's beef is at that level in this world. Even his ordinary beef tasted much better than ordinary beef. When an entire cow entered the Walmart group, the special grade beef would be removed and placed in Sam's Club for sale. This was because the beef sold there was expensive. Ordinary beef would also be sold in a special area in ordinary Walmart supermarkets. Although the quality of the beef sold there was the same as ordinary beef, the price was 1/3 more expensive. The beef in Jiang Hai's manor was now a brand, an irreplaceable brand. Jiang Hai didn't care about the outflow of live cattle, but once the live cattle left the grassland, they would gradually degenerate and they wouldn't be able to raise them at all. Jiang Hai didn't care about the outflow of live cattle, but once the live cattle left the grassland, they would gradually degenerate and they wouldn't be able to raise them. Angus cows weren't like he cows. In essence, there was a big difference. Not everyone could raise Angus cows to kill he cows. Because of this, Jiang Hai dared to call out Dong Mingluan, but Dong Mingluan didn't dare to say anything. "Mr. Jiang, we are having a party today. It is a happy party. Let's not talk about business today. I will reflect what you said to the board of directors. Now it is time to be happy." Looking at the atmosphere on the scene, it was about to drop to the freezing point. At this time, Roberson Walton, who had been standing at the back, said with a smile to Jiang Hai. Then, without giving Jiang Hai time to react, he raised his glass and said loudly to the crowd. Hearing his words, everyone also raised their glasses. The party became lively again, but this time, many people's eyes were consciously or unconsciously glancing at Jiang Hai. "Young man, it's a pleasure to meet you. I will seriously consider what you said." However, Roberson Walton walked in front of Jiang Hai and smiled at Jiang Hai. Then, without any desire to talk to Jiang Hai, he left directly. As for Dong Mingluan, he was the same. After fiercely glaring at Jiang Hai, he also left. He felt insulted. Won't you be exposed like this?" Seeing them all leave, Pra Walton, who was still in Jiang Hai's arms, raised her head and looked at Jiang Hai. She gently bit her lips and said with some worry, "It doesn't matter. I guess this time you will be the president of Sam's Club. At that time, you can help me block those people with ulterior motives. What do you want to eat? I will get it for you." Looking at Pralton's appearance, Jiang Hai smiled and scratched her nose with his hand, then said to her with a chuckle. Feeling Jiang Hai's action, Pralton's eyes were a little blurred. "I don't want to eat anything. I want to go with you." Looking at Jiang Hai, Pralton said seriously, "Go? Where to?" Looking at Pralton with a puzzled look, Jiang Hai asked strangely, "To your room." But Pralton is more direct than Jiang Hai. A pair of fiery eyes looked at Jiang Hai. Feeling the passion in her heart, Jiang Hai did not hesitate. After a chuckle, he pulled Pralton away. Looking at the two leaving figures, many men showed a look that only men can understand. As for Dong Mingluan, he was even more hateful. He felt that he was now a ninja turtle. After the two left the banquet, they took the elevator directly to the floor of Jiang Hai's suite and entered the room. As soon as the door closed, Pralton had already rushed up, her hands around Jiang Hai's neck, and she kissed Jiang Hai's mouth heavily. Now she really doesn't know how to describe her heart. The sense of security brought by Jiang Hai broke out at this time. These days, she had been thinking of a way, but she found that this was an open scheme. This was a dead knot. Her family would definitely not let the power of Walmart fall into someone else's hands because of her relationship with Dong Mingluan, so it seemed that her relationship with Dong Mingluan was a dead knot. The only thing she can do is to announce today that she will resign as the president of Sam's Club. In this way, she can protect herself. But for a career woman, her career is actually higher than everything else. To make such a decision, one could see how bitter her heart was. But at this time, Jiang Hai was like a prince on a white horse, descending from the sky, stepping on colorful clouds. Not only did he save her, but he also saved her career. Now Prawalton's inner feelings completely broke out, and she completely took the initiative. As the two of them kissed passionately, the temperature in the room continued to rise. Unknowingly, the two of them came to the sofa in the living room. At this time, the two of them were basically naked. Along with a meandering low shout, there was a rhythmic drumbeat in the room. 10 minutes later, the battlefield between the two of them rolled from the sofa to the floor, then to the wall, to the door, to the carpet in the room, and by the time they reached the bed again, it was already 2 hours later. During this time, Jiang Hai has already done it 3 times, but Prawalton didn't seem to know fatigue and was still strong. At this time, she was lying on Jiang Hai's body, with her hands around Jiang Hai's head, kissing him deeply. At the same time, she let Jiang Hai's hands grab her 2 indescribable places. Her body was constantly moving, and she had no intention of stopping. "You can't take it like this?" When Prawalton finally took a breath, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smack her butt, and then said to Prawalton helplessly, It's fine. I'll be yours tonight. I want to be with you for a night, a whole night. If the front can't do it, I still have the back. If the back can't do it, I still have the mouth. Today, I just want to be with you." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton shook her head frantically, her eyes staring at Jiang Hai. Her eyes were full of passion. Looking at Prawalton's appearance, Jiang Hai knew that she was serious. However, although Jiang Hai usually had a good mentality, he really didn't admire anyone in this regard. Today, he was going to tame this wild horse. With a flip, he pressed Prawalton under his body again. Jiang Hai's battle began. A night without words. Even if there were words, they couldn't be described, so just treat it as a night without words. When the next morning's sun shone into the hotel room, Jiang Hai was also groggily awakened by the urge to pee. He covered his eyes with his hand and glanced at the phone next to the bedside table. Unknowingly, it was already past 7 in the morning. Just as he was about to move, he found that his indescribable place was still connected to Prawalton's back. When he moved, Prawalton, who was in his arms, couldn't help but moan softly. Last night, Prawalton was indeed abnormally crazy. As she said, if the front couldn't do it, then the mouth, if the mouth couldn't do it, then the back. In the end, Jiang Hai didn't remember how many times he came, but their sheets were completely wet. Looking at the situation between the two, Jiang Hai slowly withdrew, but when he withdrew, some cough flowed out. Feeling that something was wrong, Prawalton couldn't help but wake up in an instant. She touched her back, then looked at Jiang Hai, and couldn't help but blush. Then she wanted to get out of bed and go to the bathroom, but just as her feet touched the ground, she couldn't help but cry out softly. She was so crazy last night, although Jiang Hai had already transferred spiritual energy to her. But spiritual energy couldn't cure her craziness 100%, so some pain and soft feet were inevitable. "Let's go together." Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled and got out of bed. To be honest, his feet were also a little soft. Picking up Prawalton beside him, Jiang Hai went to the bathroom with her. After going to the bathroom, the two took a shower together, but when taking a shower, it was inevitable. "Men, everyone knows. Do you still need it? Let's continue." Seeing the changes in Jiang Hai, Prawalton couldn't help but smile at Jiang Hai. "Forget it, your body can't stand it." Hearing what Prawalton said, Jiang Hai's mind shook, but then he shook his head firmly. He is not looking for a professional woman. Prawalton is his woman. Well, one of them, he won't let her be too tired. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton chuckled, but her hands touched him. "It doesn't matter, I may not be able to do that, but my mouth and hands have recovered." After whispering in Jiang Hai's ear, she squatted down and began to do the unspeakable war. About half an hour later, the two took a shower again and returned to the room. Jiang Hai let Prawalton lean for a while, and he went to change the sheets first. Then the two didn't wear clothes and just lay on the bed naked. "Jiang, do you know my story?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton hesitated for a moment, then took the initiative to ask Jiang Hai. "Well, I really don't know." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment. He really didn't seem to be familiar with Prawalton. He only knew that her name was Prawalton, and he also knew her body structure, but he really didn't know her background. Let me tell you. Looking at Jiang Hai, Pralton laid in Jiang Hai's arms and said to Jiang Hai. Speaking of Pralton's background, it wasn't very strange, it was a bit melodramatic. Her mother used to be Roberson Walton's secretary. In China, there was a tradition of the secretary doing the work, and when there was nothing to do, the secretary, cough. When Roberson Walton was 30 years old, he and Pra Walton's mother gave birth to her. But that woman wasn't a qualified mother. In fact, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that she was raised by AB*TCH. After exchanging Pralton for $3 million, she ran away with a man. Pralton was an illegitimate daughter, but she was raised by Roberson Walton. But because of her mother, Roberson Walton didn't like her, Roberson's wife didn't like her, and her brothers and sisters didn't like her either. In such an environment, Pralton developed her current temper. It was very strange, but also very stubborn. However, if she put it this way, at most, she was just a girl with a strange personality. But everything started when she was 14 years old. It wasn't the first time that Pralton had sex with Jiang Hai, and she liked women. It all started from that time. Jiang Hai didn't want any plot to abuse the owner. Here, Jiang Hai simply skipped over it. In short, it was related to her family, and Pralton had already taken revenge. But after that incident, Pralton no longer trusted men, because in her opinion, men were unreliable. From then on, she was only interested in girls, because she felt that only women wouldn't hurt women. But later, she found that she seemed to be thinking too much. Indeed, there were many women who took pleasure in hurting other women, but that was another story. Later, when she had money and power, she also collected a lot of girls, like Cheryl and the others. After hearing Pralton's story, Jiang Hai held her tightly in his arms. He didn't think that this girl's previous experience was like this. No wonder she didn't care about men. But now, it seemed that he was really a lucky man. You're the first man to walk in here. I hope you can always live here. I don't want to marry you, because I've investigated your situation, but I like you very much, very much. Let's maintain the current situation, okay? Until we die. Leaning on Jiang Hai's chest, listening to Jiang Hai's strong heartbeat, Pralton whispered. Of course, no problem. Looking at the woman in front of him, Jiang Hai made a promise seriously. Maybe he couldn't give her much. Pralton was the same as other people. Jiang Hai's other women were all given by him. But Pralton wasn't something that Jiang Hai could give. They were equal to each other. Now, Jiang Hai could give her what she wanted, so he wouldn't be stingy with these things. I want it again. Let's continue. Hearing Jiang Hai's promise, Pralton couldn't help but raise her head and say with a smile. It was said that sweet talk was the most effective attack on a woman. Jiang Hai didn't know how to sweet talk, but because she knew his character, Pralton knew that Jiang Hai would definitely keep his words. Forget it. Stay here obediently. You haven't eaten well for the past few days, right? I can feel your ribs. Do you want to eat something? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but slap her meaty part again, then sat up and said to her. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Pralton shook Jiang Hai's arm coquettishly. I don't want to eat. I just want to eat you, Pralton said, while sweeping Jiang Hai's lower part. I'll deal with you after the meal. Feeling Pralton's movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. This girl was really crazy. Slapping her hand away, Jiang Hai shook his head and stood up. He put on the bathrobe next to him, picked up the phone in the room, and called the front desk to order a table of food. Whether Pralton was hungry or not, Jiang Hai was hungry. Chapter 638. The Hilton Hotel was quite fast. Although one of their heirs was quite slow, the chef here was still very capable. About half an hour later, a dining cart had already appeared in front of Jiang Hai's room. After opening the door and giving the person a tip, Jiang Hai did not let the person in, because at this time, Pralton was still naked. He personally pushed the cart into the room. After seeing the food, Pralton was still naked. After seeing the food, she was not hungry at all. In fact, she was quite hungry now. She climbed up and sat on the bed, then opened the lid of the food placed on the bed. In an instant, a big steak appeared in front of her. Wow! Looking at the steaming steak, Pralton couldn't help but shout excitedly. Then she reached out her hand to grab it. Today's Pralton seemed to have returned to more than 10 years ago, when she was still a child. She was completely different from the iceberg and the strength when she first saw Jiang Hai. She only had a trace of childishness. However, Jiang Hai wouldn't let her grab it everywhere. After slapping her little hand, he put the food in front of the prepared table. What Jiang Hai ordered was a pure Western food. 2 steaks, 1 pasta, 1 lasagna, 1 baked lobster with cheese, plus a bowl of beef, turnip, and potato soup. Well, super soup. Finally, there was a basket of bread and butter. Although there wasn't much, it was still very satisfying. Jiang Hai and Pralton sat across the table. The two didn't eat anything since last night, so they were naturally hungry now. They began to eat quickly, but compared to Jiang Hai, Pralton's appetite was much smaller. She only had the steak and some pasta. She was already full without even eating the bread. However, the rest of Jiang Hai's food naturally couldn't run away. But just as Jiang Hai was eating happily, his body couldn't help but tremble, because at this time, he felt a pair of small feet, unknowingly, came to his groin. Feeling this scene, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at Pralton in front of him. When Pralton saw Jiang Hai looking at her, she just sat there and smiled foolishly. Looking down, the pair of small white feet, after feeling Jiang Hai's change, began to imitate his hand and began to move. This was the first time Jiang Hai felt this kind of feeling. He had to admit, it was a bit interesting. Eat, don't make trouble. He patted Pralton's calf. Well, it was more of a touch than a pat. You eat your food, I'll play mine. This is my baby, my favorite thing in the world. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Pralton raised her head proudly, continued to move her feet, and said with a smile, "You're digging your own grave." At this time, after Jiang Hai ate a few more mouthfuls, he couldn't eat anymore. He couldn't help but shake his head, then stood up and pounced on Pralton amidst her charming laughter. Just as Jiang Hai's Pralton was shamelessly there, the executives of Walmart were holding a high-level meeting. The founder of Walmart was Sam Walton. Although it was a listed company, most of the shares belonged to Sam Walton. After Sam Walton's death, his shares were handed over to his children. Although it seemed that Roberson Walton had the most shares, it was not by much. That was why Jim Walton could easily threaten his position. As long as he roped in a few people, he could easily surpass his brother's shares. As for the other brothers and sisters, they all remained neutral. They only needed to divide the money. However, although the people in the meeting at this time were at least worth tens of billions of dollars, the location of the meeting was very simple. It was a very small conference room, which was also a tradition of the Walton family. Pralton liked to show off because of her mother, but the Walton family was famous for being stingy. When Sam Walton was still alive, he was very stingy. He was a billionaire, but he had never bought a mansion. He had always lived in Pentonville and often drove his old pickup truck in and out of town. Everyone in town knew that he was very stingy. Every time he got a haircut, he only spent $5, which was the lowest price in town. However, this old man donated hundreds of millions of dollars to 5 universities in the United States and set up many scholarship schools all over the country. His sons also inherited his tradition. In the largest group in the United States, when Jim Walton was the president, his office was only 20 square meters. This was because he was the youngest son, so he was more arrogant. As the chairman, Roberson Walton's office was only 12 square meters, and the office facilities were very old. If they weren't broken, they would never be replaced. Therefore, in the circle of rich people in the United States, some people jealously said that Walmart was a place where the poor opened and the poor bought. However, these people were just jealous. The world's largest retail giant was not as simple as it seemed. Their stores were really all over the world. However, they were really stingy. The people in this room together had a net worth of more than hundreds of billions of dollars, but they asked for the smallest conference room. It was even a little crowded with these people sitting here. "Big brother, don't you want to talk about what we should do now?" But no matter what the conference room was like, they were used to it. They were here to talk business. Sitting at the bottom, Jim Walton looked at Roberson Walton and said with a smile, "I want to hear your opinions." Hearing Jim Walton's words, Roberson also said with a calm face, "You can't promise him, absolutely not. We can't be controlled by a child." As soon as Roberson Walton's voice fell, Dong Mingluan stood up with red eyes and shouted loudly. He didn't sleep last night, and he couldn't sleep. As soon as he closed his eyes, he seemed to see Prawalton and Jiang Hai having sex. But it was true that the two of them were having sex. But not knowing and knowing were really different. Now, he had to compromise with Jiang Hai. As long as he was still a man, he would never do it. But if you don't promise him, can you get his beef? At this time, an old woman sitting next to him said softly. This woman was called Alice Walton, Sam Walton's eldest daughter. She used to be the second richest person in the world, but in the Walton family, she was a woman after all, so she didn't manage the company's operations. All she wanted was money. Hearing Alice Walton's words, Dong Mingluan couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. This sentence was cutting the ground from under the pot. Just like what Alice Walton said, he couldn't guarantee that he would be able to get Jiang Hai's beef. He couldn't afford to gamble. If Prawalton's position was really removed, Jiang Hai really wouldn't supply. Who would they go to? They couldn't lose this supplier. Although it wasn't a matter of life and death, it was far from being comparable to a change. Sister-in-law, what do you think? Looking at Dong Mingluan's red face, Jim Walton couldn't help but smile and said to a fat white woman next to him. This woman was called Christy Walton, but she was actually not a member of the Walton family. Her husband was called John Walton, the second son of Sam Walton. But he passed away and left the family property to her. According to this year's Forbes list, her net worth was $20 billion. In fact, she was the richest among the people here, but she knew when to advance and when to retreat. She knew what she could say and what she couldn't say. When she heard Sam Walton's words, she just smiled and said that she had no opinion. Jim, Big Sister, and the others won't have anything to say. What do you think? After asking a group of people, except for Dong Mingluan, who strongly expressed that he wanted to fight Jiang Hai to the death, the others remained neutral. They just wanted to see how the two brothers would deal with it. Roberson Walton glanced at Jim Walton opposite him. In fact, the only people who really spoke were them. I mean, we can't lose this supplier. Let Prawalton be the president. But brother, after this, do you still dare to use her? Jim Walton knocked on the table and said with a smile, "You don't have to worry about this." Hearing Jim Walton's words, Roberson also didn't show his emotions, just said lightly. At this time, Jiang Hai and the others didn't know that when they were happy, the Walmart executives here had already made a decision. The two didn't leave the room today. They had to admit that the fighting power of American women was indeed strong, extremely strong. She also fought with Jiang Hai for a day. Although it was because of the aura, she was still not completely suppressed by Jiang Hai. Sometimes she would even resist, but when she resisted, she was suppressed faster. It wasn't until the evening that Prawalton received a call from Elizabeth Rowland, telling her that the head office had made a new decision. Next year, she would continue to worry about the president of Sam's Club. After receiving the news, Prawalton couldn't help but excitedly hug Jiang Hai again. She had to admit that Jiang Hai really did her a big favor this time, a very big favor. After the news was released, many people knew the news for the first time. The people who attended last night's party also talked about what happened last night in some high-level circles. However, in their words, the main character was not the Walton family's internal strife, but Jiang Hai. This young Huaxia man had the ability to turn an ordinary beef into a superior grade beef. He was not an ordinary person, as he could force the Walton family to compromise. This guy could not be said to be unimportant, but people were more concerned about his beef. They were 100% sure that there was a secret recipe. But what is the secret recipe? They don't know, but they are very interested to find out. After confirming that she was fine, Prawalton and Jiang Hai stayed in New York for a day, then returned to her home in Atlantic City. In recent days, not only was she worried, but even the staff of Sam's Club didn't have a good time. She had to go back to comfort them, which was the most important thing. Jiang Hai didn't go back with her, but returned to his manor. In the past 2 days and 3 nights, Jiang Hai didn't leave his suite, so it was needless to say what he was doing inside. When Prawalton recovered, she would come to Jiang Hai to do that kind of unspeakable thing. Fortunately, Jiang Hai's body was good, and he had spiritual energy. Otherwise, with this kind of intensity, either he or Prawalton would die. After all, a person's energy was limited, and they were playing too much. When Jiang Hai returned to the manor, Cheryl Lee also got the exact news, but she wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, she wanted to thank Jiang Hai in person. Originally, she was going to use her body to repay Jiang Hai, but recently, Jiang Hai didn't have any desire. He shouldn't want to touch a woman for at least 3 days. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't have the urge to be with her, Cheryl Lee was actually very moved. It seems that Jiang Hai didn't really help because of that kind of thing. He had some respect for her and Prawalton. This made Cheryl feel that Jiang Hai was actually a good person. It's just that he had too many women. After staying here for 3 days, even if she was stupid, she could see that, not to mention Aphrodite and the others, the 5 women in Jiang Hai's villa were actually interested in Jiang Hai. If Jiang Hai was willing, they would go and do something with Jiang Hai. Perhaps only a fool like Jiang Hai couldn't see it. After having a deep kiss with Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee drove her sports car and left Jiang Hai's manor. She wanted to rush back to Atlantic City. She hadn't seen Prawalton for a while. Since Jiang Hai wasn't going to let her stay here for the night, she had to find her real other half. Although this was a bit awkward, it was the truth. Jiang Hai and Prawalton should be rivals in love. However, the 2 parties might not think so. At this time, apart from those women, a man walked into Prawalton's heart for the first time. And Jiang Hai's heart, which was already full, also walked into Prawalton. No one knew what would happen between the 2 of them. In fact, even Jiang Hai didn't know if there was a female lead in this book, or who the female lead was. Unknowingly, more than a year had passed, and the female lead still hadn't been decided. It was very tragic. Chapter 639. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, Jiang Hai walked down the stairs step by step. In advertising terms, it was as if his whole body was hollowed out. He walked to the first floor and lay on the sofa, unwilling to move. Looking at his decadent appearance, Bernice, who was sitting next to him drinking milk and eating oatmeal, couldn't help but look at him seriously. "What did you do in New York these few days? Why are you so decadent?" In fact, since coming back last night, Bernice found that Jiang Hai was a little decadent. She originally thought that Jiang Hai was tired. After all, he had driven for several hours. But looking at Jiang Hai's current appearance, logically speaking, this shouldn't be the case. Although she hadn't personally experienced Jiang Hai's physical fitness, she more or less had some understanding. Jiang Hai should have recovered after a nap, so why was he still so dispirited? These days I was mainly talking to the Walton family about the deal. Because I was a little tired, I didn't sleep much. Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai's eyes flashed for a moment, but he quickly looked at Bernice and said in a serious tone. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice frowned. Her 6th sense told her that Jiang Hai was talking nonsense. What kind of person was Jiang Hai? She had been watching him for several months. This guy was usually so lazy that it made people's hair stand on end. And it could be seen that Jiang Hai's IQ wasn't too high. He was too lazy to think about things like copywriting, tricks, and so on. He just liked to win with his strength. How could you force such a person to talk to the Walton family? Regardless of whether others believed it or not, she wouldn't believe it anyway. Her eyes clearly said that she didn't believe it. However, Jiang Hai chose to ignore her gaze. He couldn't say that he had been rolling in bed in a hotel for 3 days. In fact, it proved that with Jiang Hai's aura, there was no land that was plowed to waste, only cows that were exhausted to death. Well, you have to take care of your body when you're working. There's a big family waiting for you to eat. In the end, after hesitating for a long time, Bernice chose to believe Jiang Hai. She sat there, put her 2 long legs on the coffee table and leaned against it to eat. Looking at Bernice's long legs, Jiang Hai subconsciously thought of Prawalton. Fortunately, he quickly suppressed this thought. He took a deep breath and muttered, If my heart is as clear as ice, I won't be alarmed even if the sky collapses. He finally suppressed the evil fire, but he didn't dare to sit here. Instead, he went directly to the kitchen and ate some food. After eating some food, Jiang Hai felt a lot more comfortable. After stretching for a bit, he went to the stable to take a look. He had not seen little Xia for many days. He wanted to see this little, big horse. He went to feed it some carrots, and then strolled around, feeling the cold wind blowing on his face. Jiang Hai was also a lot more energetic. He stretched his sore waist, and Jiang Hai raised his head. At this time, the color of the sky above his manor was not very good. Although there were no dark clouds, there was a thin layer of clouds blocking the sky, making it look gray. In Winthrop in November, the weather was very cold and the wind was not small. He didn't know when the next snow would come, but it shouldn't make Jiang Hai wait too long. After walking around outside, Jiang Hai returned to the manor for lunch. It was obvious that Jiang Hai was home, and Xiaoya was also very happy. She made a lot of delicious food. She also made soup dumplings that Jiang Hai wanted to eat the day before he left. After eating a delicious lunch, Jiang Hai said, after lunch, Jiang Hai went back to his room to sleep, which was rare. He had indeed been lacking sleep these days. Jiang Hai slept until 2 o'clock in the afternoon before he woke up. However, he didn't wake up because he had woken up, but because his phone had woken him up. He glanced at the name on the phone. It turned out to be Selena Gomez, which surprised Jiang Hai a little. Selena? Why is she looking for me? Since the last time he took Selena Gomez out to play, Jiang Hai and her had less contact. Although basically every 2 or 3 days, they would text and video call each other. In front of Jiang Hai, Selena Gomez was very casual. Almost every video call was when she had just taken a shower and was not wearing clothes. She would video call Jiang Hai just like that. It was obvious that she trusted Jiang Hai a lot. Otherwise, if these scenes were recorded and posted on the internet, it would cause a storm. Of course, Jiang Hai would not do that. Therefore, Jiang Hai knew about her recent situation. A few days ago, when New York started to become cold, she returned to Los Angeles. She should still be in Los Angeles now. Why was she calling him at this time? However, although he was curious, Jiang Hai still picked up the phone and asked her directly, "Hello, Selena, are you looking for me?" "Hello, Jiang, where are you?" Listening to Jiang Hai's voice, Selena Gomez's side was a little chaotic. Selena's voice was almost shouting, which made Jiang Hai a little confused. What the hell is this? I'm at home, taking a nap. Rubbing his eyes, Jiang Hai said to Selena Gomez. "What nap? Get up, come to New York, I'll take you out to play." Hearing that Jiang Hai was sleeping, Selena Gomez couldn't help but spit. She knew Jiang Hai. This guy never slept during the day. He must be teasing her. "Play what?" "Sister, I just came back from New York yesterday." Hearing that he was going to New York again, Jiang Hai's forehead had 3 black lines, and then he said helplessly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Selena Gomez on the other side was also speechless. "Are you coming or not? I'm introducing you to a beauty, are you not happy?" Facing Jiang Hai on the other side of the phone, Selena Gomez said with some anger. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai sighed. He really couldn't move. However, considering that if he didn't go, there would be some estrangement with Selena Gomez in the future, Jiang Hai nodded and said that he would go in a while. After receiving the news that Jiang Hai would come, Selena Gomez also smiled. After staying in bed for a while, Jiang Hai forced his body, which had not recovered, to get out of bed. He put on the set of clothes he was familiar with and went downstairs. Seeing Jiang Hai coming down in clothes, the girls who were downstairs couldn't help but be stunned, and their faces were not very good. "Are you going out again?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Bernice said with some dissatisfaction. "Well, I'm going to New York again. There are still some things that haven't been settled last time, so I have to go again." With a weak voice, Jiang Hai slowly walked to the door, but his eyes kept dodging. Jiang Hai also knew that he was not born to lie, so not letting them see his eyes was also one of his disguises. "Oh, when will you come back?" Hearing that Jiang Hai was going back because of the last incident, although she was a little reluctant, Bernice and the others would not stop him, but Bernice still said seriously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai frowned. I don't know, but I may come back tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I shouldn't be gone for too long. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai gave an uncertain time. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Bernice and the others looked at each other. Then go, be careful on the road, don't wait until Christmas to come back. Hearing their words, Jiang Hai also smiled awkwardly and walked out of the villa. Looking at his leisurely little home, he couldn't help but sigh. He hated being busy the most, but he didn't know why he was so busy recently. It shouldn't be. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai stepped on the accelerator, and the car went to New York City. When he left, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When he arrived, it was almost 7 o'clock. After entering New York, Jiang Hai called Selena Gomez. Originally, he thought that Selena Gomez called him to spend time with him, but he didn't expect that she actually gave him a KTV seat, which made Jiang Hai a little speechless. It seemed that she did say on the phone that she wanted to introduce a beauty to him. Originally, Jiang Hai thought that she was joking, but now it seemed that it was not as simple as a joke. In order to prevent drinking later, Jiang Hai deliberately bought 2 sandwiches and a set of pancakes on the street before he went. After eating first, he went to the place. When he arrived, it was already around 8 o'clock in the evening. This KTV, in fact, was not an exaggeration to call it a nightclub. The first floor was indeed for dancing, but the second floor was a special box. In New York, there were many rich people and celebrities, so in order to protect the privacy of these people, many people opened such a place with excellent security, so that reporters couldn't enter. Here, if one wasn't a celebrity, then they needed someone to bring them in. Otherwise, ordinary people wouldn't be able to enter, just like the place Jiang Hai went to last time. At that time, if it weren't for Moses Adams, Jiang Hai wouldn't have been able to get in. It was the same today. After parking the car, Jiang Hai walked into the nightclub. The first floor was naturally very noisy, and Jiang Hai was not interested. He took the elevator to the second floor, but just as he got out of the elevator, he was stopped by 2 big men. Sir, I'm sorry, please show me your membership card. Hearing the 2 big men, Jiang Hai could not help but be stunned. How can I have a membership card here? But fortunately, his reaction was not slow. He immediately remembered to call Selena Gomez. The phone was connected after 2 rings. After explaining the situation, Selena Gomez rushed over in less than a minute. Looking at Selena Gomez in front of him, Jiang Hai could not help but light up, and then his vision went dark. Because at this time, Selena Gomez did not come in casual clothes, but wore a black leather skirt. But what Jiang Hai cared about most was her cleavage. It was almost the same as not wearing it. The deep V-neck opened all the way to her belly button. Jiang Hai is a traditional Xia person, and his possessiveness is very strong. Although he knows that he can't make Selena Gomez follow him wholeheartedly, after all, his surname is Jiang, not Long and not Aotian. But when he saw this situation, he was still a little upset. He took off his coat and put it on Selena Gomez. And Selena Gomez, who was telling the 2 security guards that Jiang Hai was her friend, felt Jiang Hai's action. She couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then a sweet smile appeared on her face. She tightened her clothes, and regardless of whether Jiang Hai's clothes matched her, she smiled and pulled Jiang Hai's hand. She directly took Jiang Hai's arm and walked toward one of the rooms. Have you missed me recently? Looking at Jiang Hai, Selena Gomez said with a smile. Have you missed me? Looking at her, Jiang Hai touched his nose and then asked. Humph, I won't miss a big bad guy like you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Selena Gomez wrinkled her nose and said cutely. Looking at her appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled, and then followed her into a room. When Jiang Hai walked in, he found that there were a lot of people in the room. Most of them were women, and they were all tall beauties. There were also a few men, and some of them were more familiar. Jiang Hai looked at the room with more than 20 people, and he couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't like this kind of occasion very much. Come on, let me introduce you. This is my boyfriend Jiang Hai. He is a rich man, but let me tell you, don't have any ideas about him. These are all my friends, so I won't introduce them one by one. Seeing the door open, everyone in the room couldn't help but look over. When they saw that it was Jiang Hai, they couldn't help but be stunned, and Jiang Hai was also stunned. At this time, Selena Gomez jumped out and pulled Jiang Hai with a smug face and introduced him. When they heard Selena Gomez say that Jiang Hai was a rich man, everyone in the room couldn't help but shush. Obviously, these people didn't care too much about Selena Gomez's words, and Selena Gomez also pulled Jiang Hai into the room, came to the front of the bar, and sat there face to face with Jiang Hai. "What's the situation? I thought you just asked me to come over to have fun." Glancing at the people in the room, Jiang Hai shrugged helplessly. He still didn't understand what the hell was going on. These people are some singers and actors. Oh, most of them are models. Look at those tall guys with long legs, they are all supermodels. I have a show tomorrow, and I'll give you some benefits. Let's broaden your horizons. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Selena Gomez also laughed and said with a smile while handing an invitation to Jiang Hai, "You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."